Chapter 1776. Her childish voice, everyone was dumbfounded. Where was the Queen of Curses? How did she turn into a little girl? Gluttony, great soul overlord, who had transformed into his true form, was laughing excitedly. He had made the right bet. Something had happened to the Queen of Curses. If the graceful figure from before had the power to destroy heaven and earth, then this lowly before him was simply a clown acting cute. Her aura was extremely weak, not even 1/10,000th of the Queen of Curses. Duchess Nightmare and the others were struck dumb. They did not seem to have expected this. The army of soul demons, who were about to flee, froze for a moment. The next moment, they let out deafening roars that shook the void. Their voices were filled with anger at being deceived. Duchess Nightmare's face was pale, and the silver-haired woman despaired. The Queen of Curses had turned into a little girl? Where was the mighty Queen of Curses who had suppressed many universes in those years? Was Void City really going to fall into the hands of the soul demons? Buffon's expression was very strange. He was no stranger to that little girl. Wasn't she the one who ate spicy strips in his restaurant? He was curious where she had gone, but now it seemed that she had come here to pretend to be the Queen of Curses. Wait a minute. Could this little girl be the Queen of Curses? Buffon's expression grew stranger. The Queen of Curses, who was said to be on the same level as the soul god and the god of cooking, was actually a little girl wearing diapers? The Queen of Curses' robe shrank, and her figure, which had stepped out from behind the door, gradually became shorter. She seemed to notice her change, so she raised a hand and slapped her head. Then, she turned and went back into the palace. Gluttony, great soul overlord's laughter echoed through the starry sky. Envy, great soul overlord, and greed, great soul overlord sneered. Thousands of soul demons descended once again, causing heaven and earth to shake. Gluttony, great soul overlord raised his hand. Although he was only left with his true form, the great soul overlord was a soul demon. A powerful suction erupted and sucked countless soul demons into his palm. His fleshly body, which had been shattered by the queen's blow, began to slowly recover. Twisting his neck, Gluttony, great soul overlord, opened his mouth. At this moment, he looked like an ugly fish with a huge mouth full of ferocious and sharp teeth. However, his aura was extremely powerful. Soul, do it. Something has happened to the Queen of Curses. Her strength has been greatly reduced. Now is the best time for us to take control of Void City. Gluttony, great soul overlord said, his huge eyes rolling. Soul's pale face gradually calmed down. That's right, she no longer had a chance, so she could only seize the opportunity now. Soul's expression was extremely grave. Do it. She gritted her teeth and said, boom. His words fell. Gluttony, great soul overlord, greed, great soul overlord, and envy, great soul overlord struck at the same time. They soared into the sky and flew past. In an instant, he charged towards Duchess Nightmare, who was still in shock. Sensing danger, Duke Nightmare's hair stood on end. She turned around and blasted out a move that seemed to tear the heavens and earth apart. However, the aura of the three great soul overlords joined together, and the power of three sinful forces seemed to form a strange array. Then, it turned into a huge evil paw. The paw slapped down. A rumbling sound rang out. Duchess Nightmare was seriously injured. She was knocked flying backward and smashed hard into the palace. Her face was ashen, and she still could not believe what had happened. What happened to the Queen of Curses? In the distance, the expressions of Buffon and the others changed dramatically. Duchess Yunlin moved in a flash and let out a long howl, causing the stars to tremble. With one move, she went straight toward the three great soul overlords. Lord Go barked. His paw reached out and tore through the void. With the death spicy strip dangling between his lips, Hades Era took a step forward, pulled out the golden spicy strip, and went straight toward the three great soul overlords. The three Duke-level experts struck out in an instant. The evil paw swept toward them. Lord Dog and the others' attacks landed on the evil claw, but they were actually unable to shake it. They could only cause it to flicker unsteadily. This is Duchess Yunlan's plump body trembled. In the distance, Yu and Hutu focused their eyes as well. Hutu sucked in a breath. This is the heavenly demon array. It's constructed with the sinful power of a great soul overlord, and its power is definitely not as simple as 1 plus 1. The evil paw slammed into Lord Go, Hades' Era, and Duchess Yunlan, making them unable to move forward. In front of the palace, Soul's eyes gleamed with excitement. Step by step, she walked toward the distance. The palaces were right in front of her. She could almost see the peerless throne behind the palaces. That was the throne of Void City. As long as she sat there, she would become the master of Void City. Stop right there. Duchess Nightmare staggered to her feet and yelled, "You're right." Soul's face grew serious. She turned to look at Duchess Nightmare. Struck by the evil paw, Duchess Nightmare was seriously injured, and her aura was weak. However, she still had some confidence in dealing with Soul. "You're not qualified to sit on that throne," Duchess Nightmare said, taking a deep breath. "What?" Soul asked calmly. She was neither angry nor annoyed. She walked step by step, getting closer and closer to Duchess Nightmare. "Do you think those two out there are more qualified than me?" Soul said. Blood trickled down the corner of Duchess Nightmare's mouth. Her nightmare divine body was on the verge of disintegration. However, she gritted her teeth and stared coldly at Soul. "Look at what this woman has done to Void City. I can't believe she lured an army of soul demons into the city. Is she not going to give up until she destroys Void City?" "You're not qualified," Duchess Nightmare said coldly. "If I'm not qualified, then those two out there are even less qualified. I fought for everything I have today with my life. What were they doing when I was fighting for my life in the Soul Demon universe?" Soul said. Her tone had become much more urgent. "They can't compare to what I've experienced. My qualifications are not up to you to judge." Soul's eyes suddenly turned scarlet. The next moment, a black orb condensed with the power of sin appeared in her hand. Inside the orb, suddenly, a withered claw stretched out like a piece of dead wood. Duchess Nightmare's pupils constricted. She found that her body was pressed hard to the ground by the withered claw. She wanted to break the claw with her supreme curse power, but she found that she could not break it. "What's going on?" Duchess Nightmare sucked in a cold breath. Bam! Soul's palm pressed against her head. Then she slammed it hard on the ground, shattering it and cracking it. "Lie down. The throne of Void City is mine," Soul said. At this moment, her eyes were scarlet, and her aura was extremely terrifying. It was as if the soul in this body was not the soul that Duchess Nightmare was familiar with, but an extremely terrifying soul. As Soul spoke, it was as if a soul was about to come out of her body. Even her voice had become vague and hoarse. Soul rose to her feet and walked unsteadily toward the Queen of Curses' palace. Her scarlet eyes narrowed slightly, and the corners of her mouth curved upward into an excited smile. In the sky, the great battle continued. Terrible attacks and rumbling filled the air. The three great soul overlords had joined forces with the heavenly demon array to suppress the Lord Go and the others. For a moment, they were in a stalemate. The army of soul demons was also frantically invading. They were forced back by Bu Fong, Xiao Xiaolong, and the others with dark cuisine. However, this was not a perfect solution. The divine sense of Xiao Xiaolong and the others was also rapidly depleting. The Fox of Annihilation kept spewing soul meatballs, killing one soul demon after another. However, the soul demons kept coming, and even after they died, they could still reform their bodies. They were very difficult to deal with. Xiao Bai also joined the battle. Purple-eyed Xiao Bai was extremely ferocious. Purple light beams shot out and swept across a large area. With just a few people, they had resisted the army of tens of thousands of soul demons. Bu Fong frowned. He turned to look at the Queen of Curses' palace, which was shrouded in darkness. This was not the way. "Hold on for a while. I'll go and have a look," Bu Fong said to Xiao Xiaolong and the others. With the support of the oyster pancakes provided by Bu Fong, they could continue to use their divine senses. He nodded solemnly. especially with Neo Hansen's help. At some point, Neo Hansen had concocted a seed. It should be made from the corpse of Pride Great Soul Overlord that Bufong had left in the heaven and earth farmland. When the seeds fell on a soul demon's body, they would gradually erode the soul demon. It was a sharp weapon against soul demons. If it were not for Neo Hansen, Xiao Xiaolong and the others would have been defeated. After all, there were just too many soul demons. Xiao Bai was killing in the distance. A mountain of soul demon corpses had piled up under his feet. He looked like a god of slaughter. Bu Fong spun, and the law of space swirled around him. Bu Fong went straight through the darkness. Yu and Hutu followed him. As cursed goddesses, they also wanted to know what had happened to the Queen of Curses. They also had a chance to compete for the throne of Void City. The three of them came through the darkness. They landed on the dilapidated ground in front of the Queen of Curses' palace. Oh, the withered branches looked as if they were growing out of the ground. They bound Duchess Nightmare's body. She lay on the ground, her eyes dull. Her life force seemed to be absorbed by the withered branches. Bufong, Yu, and Huta came over. They all sucked in a cold breath. What is this? Bufong frowned. Yu shook her head. She did not understand. Hutu, on the other hand, was lost in thought. She seemed to have seen something like this before. Then, she seemed to think of something, and her face filled with horror. This is the soul demon universe's soul devouring tree, cultivated with the essence of soul demons. Hutu sucked in a cold breath. There were many almighty experts in the primitive universe, but they still struggled to fight against soul demons. It was not only because of the uniqueness of soul demons, but also because of these soul-devouring trees. When soul overlords mastered weapons made of soul-devouring trees, their fighting prowess would increase countless times. Legend had it that soul-devouring trees were controlled by the soul god. Bufong did not expect to see this thing in Void City. Frowning, Bufong raised his hand and touched the soul-devouring tree. The soul-devouring tree immediately wriggled, and fine branches extended from it, trying to bind Bufong. Bufong tore the branches apart. The divine flame surged. Bufong was going to burn the soul-devouring tree. However, as soon as the divine flame touched it, Duchess Nightmare, standing under the tree, widened her eyes and let out a miserable howl. Don't! Her soul is now one with the soul-devouring tree. If you burn the tree, it will be the same as burning her soul. Hutu quickly stopped Bufong. Bufong stopped immediately. This was a little tricky. Don't worry about me. Go to the Queen's palace and stop Soul. The throne of Void City must not fall into her hands. Her will is controlled by the Soul God. Duchess Nightmare said painfully and anxiously. Bufong and the others also felt a slight headache. For the time being, they had no choice but to give up on saving Duchess Nightmare, and head toward the Queen's palace. The heavy stone door was ajar. When Bufong and the others arrived, they saw Soul's body sway and enter in a flash. Hutu and Nethery exchanged a glance and hurried over to them. With a sway of their bodies, they also dived into the hole. Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. Bufong did not know whether he should go to the Queen's palace or not. After all, according to the Queen's character, she hated chefs very much. He was afraid that if he went in, he would be killed by the Empress trick. If that happened, he would want to cry but have no tears. However, after thinking about it, in the end, Bufong still stepped into the door. Not to mention that you had already gone in. Bufong had an intuition that the Queen of Curses should have something to do with the god of cooking. This alone made it worth Bufong's time to step into the door. His body swayed. Bufong opened the stone door. He took a deep breath and stepped into it. The moment he stepped in, a silhouette dashed toward him at high speed. Chapter 1777. As soon as he stepped into the Queen of Curses' palace, a figure flew towards him at high speed. Bufong frowned. He raised his hand and pressed it against the figure's head. The figure in front of him maintained a charging posture. She stretched out her arms as if she was moving forward. Stinky chef, give this queen your dish. A childish voice rang out. Bufong could not help but raise his eyebrows. What was this? Was it a little girl? Bufong stood there calmly, pressing against the little girl's head. No matter how the latter moved her arms, she could not reach Bufong. She immediately took a step back in anger. How can you still be so calm here? Bufong looked at the little girl with a strange expression. It was really hard to imagine that the little girl in front of him was actually the Queen of Curses, the domineering Queen of Curses who suppressed the universe and made the surrounding universes tremble, was actually so cute. It's a long story. You chefs are all bad things. The little girl hugged her arms, pouted, and rolled her eyes. Then don't eat my dish, Bufong said. The little girl hurriedly glared at him. That won't do. I only hate chefs, but I don't hate food, the little lowly said with a serious expression, and Bufong almost believed her. Bufong thought to himself, my dish might have some beneficial effect on the little lowly. Otherwise, she wouldn't be so eager to eat it. However, Bufong was not sure what kind of beneficial effect it had. What dish do you want? Bufong looked at the little girl who was puffing up. When the little girl heard this, her eyes lit up. It's that long, spicy, and numb one, the little girl said. Death spicy strip? Bufong was stunned. The little girl had eaten the death spicy strip in his restaurant before. It was a dark cuisine. It was so small, but the taste was so strong. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. Boom. Suddenly, in the palace, there was a violent tremor. Bufong's face suddenly changed. You and Hutu have entered the palace, but I haven't found them yet. At this time, Bufong finally had the mood to look around. This palace was extraordinary. All around them was a boundless starry sky. Faint white smoke was rising in spirals. At the highest point, there was a flight of stairs made from meteorites, and the flight of stairs was over 100 steps. At the top of the 100-step starry sky stairway, there was a chair. It was illusory, mystical, and incomparably noble. That was the throne of Void City. Bufong looked at the throne. Although it felt very close, he knew that it was an illusion. Stop looking. You're not a curse goddess, so you'll never be able to get close to the stairway of star and the throne of nothingness. The little girl crossed her arms in front of her chest like an adult, glanced at Bufong, and said, that throne symbolizes authority. Sitting on it, one can overlook the universe. Bufong gave her a sideways glance. I don't care. Where are you? Hutu and the others. And Sol, the cursed goddess who came in earlier? Bufong asked. The little girl's face was cold and arrogant. She did not answer Bufong. Do you still want the death spicy strip? Bufong said, narrowing his eyes and twitching the corner of his mouth. It was as if he was a bad uncle trying to coax a little girl with a lollipop. The little girl was furious. She had to bow her head when she was under someone else's roof. They have entered the grand, cursed array and are heading for the stairway of star, she said. So, you can't control them to go to the throne now. Bufong paused. The little girl rolled her eyes, lifted her floral dress, and twirled in front of Bufong like a little fairy. His tone was lifeless as he said, do you think my current state is awesome? Why do you think the soul demons dare to invade Void City with their army? Soul God, that old geezer, can see through everything. The little lowly exhaled and said. Bufong's brows furrowed. He turned to look at the stairway of star in the distance. There seemed to be 3 blurry silhouettes constantly moving forward in the curling layers of clouds. Finally, the first figure stepped onto the stairway. It was cursed goddess Sol. Bufong's pupils constricted. Before long, another figure walked out of the clouds. It was Hutu. The two of them climbed up one after the other. Their pace was neither fast nor slow. Cursed goddess Sol glanced over her shoulder at Hutu, who was following closely behind her. Her eyes gleamed fiercely. The throne of Void City could only belong to her. After a long time, Nethery's figure walked out of the layers of clouds. Compared to cursed goddess Sol and Hutu, Yu's strength is a little weaker. Bufong withdrew his gaze and looked at the little girl. Tell me, what's going on with you? Are you really the Queen of Curses? Bufong asked, frowning as he looked indifferently at the little girl. The palace seemed to be isolated from the world. It was extremely quiet and no one could hear the fighting and noise outside. For a moment, the atmosphere was a little awkward. The little girl did not seem to want to talk about it. However, Bufong was not in a hurry. Calmly, he took out a death-spicy strip, held it in the corner of his mouth, and bit into it. He raised his eyebrows slightly. Bufong sucked in a cold breath. "It's really spicy." The little girl did not move. As she listened to Bufong munching on the spicy strip, she finally could not stand it anymore. She glared at Bufong. "Give me the death-spicy strip," she said. Bufong could not help but ask, "What's your relationship with Era? Why do you like spicy strips so much?" "Relationship? Of course not." "You don't understand." The little girl was still very angry. Sure enough, no chef is good. Bufong did not speak again. He just kept munching on the spicy strip. The little girl pursed her lips. She turned her head and looked at Bufong. After a long time, she sighed. "I'm the Queen of Curses. Or rather, I'm not. The Queen of Curses is still asleep. And I can be considered a condensation of her spirit, a wisp of her will," the little girl said. Bufong paused. He even forgot to swallow the spicy strip in his mouth. "Is there such a thing? The Queen of Curses is still asleep? Where is she?" Bufong asked. The little girl raised a hand and pointed at the stairway of star in the distance. "In the stairway of star, under the throne, the Queen's immortal body is buried there. I was also born there. I belong to the Queen's will, and I know some of her memories, which belong to the will of Void City," the little girl said seriously. Bufong could see that she was not lying. "The Queen's memory clearly shows that chefs are not good people." The little lowly added another sentence. Bufong twitched his mouth. Did the Queen of Curses have some grudge with chefs? Someone who could have a grudge with the Queen should be the god of cooking. For some reason, Bufong's heart was filled with the fire of gossip. However, the little girl did not know much. He could not help but feel a little disappointed. "What about them?" Bufong was referring to you and the other two, who were climbing the stairway of star in the distance. "Whoever seizes the throne will gain control of Void City," said the little girl. She was a body of will, but the Queen of Curses was actually still asleep, or rather, dead. So there was nothing she could do. Even though she knew that letting Soul sit on the throne would be a disaster for Void City, she could not stop it. If she had a way, she would have done it long ago. Unfortunately, she only had the Queen's will, but she had no power. This was also the reason why she had been avoiding Soul. At most, she could use her control of Void City to project a shadow, such as to fool Countess Xiaoqiu. If she really had to do it, she would not have been able to do anything. As for why she was so eager to eat the death spicy strip, because the little girl found something. She had eaten the death spicy strip. Before that, she had temporarily entered the state of the Queen of Curses and smashed Gluttony Great Soul Overlord with one move. Although that power was only for a moment. It was a pleasant surprise for the little girl. That was why she was so eager to eat the death spicy strip. It was not just because it was delicious. Bufong frowned, holding the death spicy strip between his lips. In the distance, the competition on the Stairway of Star had reached a white-hot stage. Of course, it was mainly the competition between Soul and Hutu. You, on the other hand, were completely left behind. Both of them were almost at the top, but you had only climbed halfway. But it's not Yu's fault. It's mainly because of the gap in strength. However, Bufong frowned, a little suspicious. "You still have fortune flatbreads. Why don't you use them? Maybe a miracle will happen if you eat them?" Bufong withdrew his gaze. Bufong took out a death-spicy strip and stared at the little girl. Pinching the chili strip, he stared at the little lowly and said, "Little Curse, this name isn't too good. I'll call you Little Curse. Little Curse, tell me, what do you want a death-spicy strip for? Don't tell me you just want it. What the F*** are you talking about?" The little girl wished she could bite Bufong. The Queen is right. Chefs are really annoying. Do you feel the Queen of Curses aura up ahead? That's right. That's me. After eating the spicy strip, the little girl puffed out her flat chest. Bufong paused. Did Kersey mean that after eating the spicy strip, she could regain the strength of the Queen of Curses? There was such a function. Even Bufong, the chef who created the death spicy strip, did not know that the death spicy strip could have such a function. However, he did not know whether the death spicy strip was true or not. Bufong gave the little girl the death spicy strip. The latter excitedly took the spicy strip and started munching on it. Her lips were red and swollen like sausages. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. "Kersey, you are the queen's will. If the queen sees you like this, I'm afraid she won't be able to hold you down anymore." Bufong did not doubt the little girl's words. Perhaps what the little loli said was true. The Queen of Curses was really still asleep. However, Kersey could not really be regarded as a little girl. Although she was small, she had lived longer than Bufong. Who knew if she had any ulterior motives? However, according to Kersey's description, what is the soul demon's purpose? Bufong focused his eyes and stared at the little girl, who had stuffed the last bit of the spicy strip into her mouth. Her mouth was swollen, and her hands were red and oily. She even sucked on her fingers and burped. Only then did Bufong ask, "Kersey, tell me, what is the soul demon's purpose? Is it just to control Void City?" The little girl stopped what she was doing. She turned her head slightly. Her face was shrouded in darkness and terror. There was also a deep coldness. "Because the soul god wants to wake up," she said. Her tone was as cold as the ice in the sky, and her eyes were indifferent and ruthless. Bufong's body was reflected in his pitch-black pupils, and the cursed snakes were coiling around him like silk. Bufong's breath caught in his throat, and he arched an eyebrow. He felt a great pressure suddenly descend on his shoulders. The little girl in front of him began to grow. From petite and cute, she grew taller and taller, noble and distant. A terrible aura spread in an instant, shaking the entire palace. Chapter 1778. A terrible aura spread in an instant and filled the whole palace. The little Loli's figure also slowly became tall and slender, as if her figure had transformed into the universe. She turned to look at Bufong, making Bufong feel tremendous pressure. The Queen of Curses. After eating the death spicy strip, she turned into the Queen of Curses. This little girl can really change at will. Bufong took a deep breath and looked indifferently at the woman in front of him, who was as hazy as a star. Her body was shrouded in a hazy curse aura. She was one of the people who stood at the top of the universe. "Are you afraid of me now?" the woman asked. Her voice was cold and distant. However, Bufong was quite familiar with the tone. It was Kersey's. Although the Queen of Curse's body had transformed, it was Kersey, the clone of the Queen's consciousness, who was in control of it. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. "I'm not afraid." Bufong shook his head. The Queen of Curses smiled. Then she walked out of the door. As he took a step forward, an earth-shattering aura rumbled as it surged forth. The faces of the people fighting in front of the Queen of Curses' palace changed in an instant. Lord Go and the others fell to the ground and put some distance between them. The strength of the three great soul overlords in the heavenly demon array was too strong. Even Lord Go and the others felt that it was very difficult to form the array, and they were being suppressed. Oh, the three great soul overlords were full of confidence. However, when the Queen of Curses' world-shattering aura appeared, their expressions changed dramatically. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord was even more horrified. Impossible. How could the Queen of Curses appear again? Envy Great Soul Overlord and Greed Great Soul Overlord were also scared out of their wits. Didn't something happen to the Queen of Curses? Why did she appear again? No, this is not the Queen of Curses. It must be fake. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord narrowed his eyes and said coldly. The three of them formed the heavenly demon array, glanced at Lord Go and the others, and then soared into the sky. Monstrous, sinful energy spread out and quickly turned into a terrifying whirlwind. A torrential aura filled the sky, destroying heaven and earth as it turned into a giant arm. The arms stretched across the void and slammed toward the Queen of Curses, who was standing at the door. This was treason. However, at this moment, the three great soul overlords were completely unbridled. After all, The Queen of Curses was in existence on the same level as the Soul God. Duchess Nightmare, Duchess Yunlan, and the others had ugly expressions on their faces. These soul demons were provoking the majesty of Void City and the Queen of Curses. However, there was nothing they could do. The three great soul overlords trapped in the heavenly demon formation were too strong. Rumble. The ground of the Queen of Curses' palace began to crack. In the void, the starry sky trembled and cracked, as if stars were falling and shooting stars were streaking across the sky. The Queen of Curses was noble, indifferent, cold, and heartless. She stood in front of the door and looked indifferently at the three great soul overlords' crazy attacks. Die, the Queen of Curses said lightly. His voice resounded throughout Void City. Everyone's hair stood on end. A murderous aura spread through the void, and an invisible darkness descended. Bufong watched all this from behind the door. Although Kersey was the clone of the Queen's will, she carried the Queen's will. Obviously, she did not want the Queen's majesty to be violated. Rumble. The Queen of Curses raised her hand. The next moment, an illusory palm materialized in midair, then shot toward the heavenly demon formation that the three great soul overlords were attacking. A collision broke out in an instant. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord's pupils constricted. If his guess was right, the Queen of Curses was fake. Envy Great Soul Overlord and Greed Great Soul Overlord were also overwhelmed with emotions. If they could severely damage the Queen's majesty and pull her down from her pedestal, Void City would be theirs. Kill them, they roared. It was an earth-shattering collision. The next moment, the world fell silent. Rumble. After the collision, half of Void City began to crumble. The three great soul overlords were scared out of their wits. The moment their bodies collided, they were crushed by a terrifying force. Bam! 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 The three great soul overlords' fleshly bodies exploded in an instant, turning into countless pieces of flesh that filled the air. The heavenly demon formation was destroyed with one move. It was as fragile as a pancake. Everyone was dumbstruck. The army of soul demons was silent. In midair, the pressure on Xiao Xiaolong and the others was greatly relieved. The army of soul demons was frightened. The three great soul overlords were defeated in an instant. How could they have the courage to fight back? Some soul demons had already begun to flee in panic. Bam! The ground crumbled, and huge cracks spread across it. The Queen of Curses, standing in front of the door, seemed to have dimmed a little. Suddenly, many people froze, because an arm reached out from behind the door and handed a long thing to the Queen of Curses. She took it, stuffed it into her mouth, and began to chew. What the F***? Hades Era's eyes widened. He did not know what to say. Lord Go and the others looked at him in confusion. Don't you recognize it? Hades Era's face was filled with excitement. He pointed at the Queen of Curses and said, Don't you recognize the thing sticking out from behind the door? Lord Go and the dukes looked puzzled. They still did not understand. I don't want to talk to you anymore. Hades Era rubbed his chin excitedly. Spicy strips. I can recognize them even if they turn into ashes. It was the death spicy strip that the Queen had stuffed in her mouth just now. I didn't expect that the Queen of Curses is a kindred spirit like I. She is indeed the Queen of Curses who controls Void City and watches over the universe. She has good taste. In midair, the true forms of the three soul demons appeared. They were shivering. Gluttony. Didn't you King say that there's something wrong with the Queen of Curses? Envy Great Soul Overlord growled. Their fleshly bodies have been destroyed by that one move just now. Was there something wrong with the Queen? Greed Great Soul Overlord had lost all hope. I can't believe the Queen of Curses has awakened. We're doomed. We're doomed. We can't go back. Gluttony Great Soul Overlord was horrified as well. If he was not mistaken the first time, there was definitely something wrong with the Queen's body. Otherwise, she would not have turned into a child and run into the palace. What was the situation now? But no matter what, they were going to be defeated this time. They were no match for the Queen of Curses, even when she was weak. She was in existence on the same level as the Soul God. Bufong leaned against the door of the palace, the corners of his mouth curling up slightly. Not bad. It feels good to hug someone's thigh. Although it's a fake thigh, no one knows it. Kill them, Bufong said. However, the Queen of Curses, who was Cursey, did not kill them. She had eaten another death spicy strip, which meant she had another chance to strike. But Cursey raised her hand. Her noble hand moved gracefully. Then, she gently tapped the void. Rumble. The three great soul overlords turned and were about to flee. However, they were horrified to find that the void was frozen. The void around their bodies was being sliced apart inch by inch, constantly closing in on them. Soon, the three great soul overlords were trapped in a narrow square space. The cage of nothingness. The three great soul overlords trembled with fear and did not dare to move. The cage of nothingness was the Queen of Curses' divine power. If they tried to break out of the cage, they would be cut to pieces in an instant. It was over. The battle was completely over. The soul demon's 1,000-year hegemony was completely over. The three great soul overlords closed their eyes in despair. After using the cage of nothingness, the Queen of Curses' body seemed to become unstable again. She re-entered the palace and hid behind the door. Bufong could not help but twitch his mouth as he watched the queen's graceful figure gradually turn into a little girl. I can't hold on any longer. Cursey's face was pale, and her body seemed to be fading away. Every time I use the queen's will, I have to rest for a long time. This time, I've used it twice in a row. It's too much of a burden for me, she said, leaning against the wall. Holding the death spicy strip in his hand, Bufong paused. Do you still want spicy strips? Bufong asked after thinking for a moment. Cursey rolled her eyes at him. Bufong put away the spicy strip and handed her an oyster pancake. After eating it, her face looked much better. Why didn't you kill them? These great soul overlords are disgusting. They deserve to die, Bufong said. I dare not. Cursey said as she ate the oyster pancake. Dare not? Why not? You are the Queen of Curses. Bufong was puzzled. I'm the fake Queen of Curses. Cursey rolled her eyes. When I sealed them, I sensed a pair of eyes staring at me. If I really killed them, I felt a terrible will descend. At that time, I really couldn't hold on any longer. Cursey said. Bufong paused. There was a will behind the great soul overlords? The will of Soul God? Had Soul God awakened? After eating, Cursey breathed a sigh of relief. I don't think it's Soul God. Although I don't know what happened back then, one thing is certain. Soul God's injury is no weaker than the Queen's. If the Queen shows no sign of waking up, Soul God won't wake up so early. Cursey was full of confidence. Bufong, however, was very suspicious. Could this little girl be a poisonous healer? If Soul God really woke up, who could stop him? In the palace, the competition on the Stairway of Star had reached a white-hot stage. Rumble. Outside the palace, a huge projection suddenly descended. That startled everyone, and they jerked their heads around. One by one, all eyes fell on the back of the palace. There, the projection of the Stairway of Star descended over the palace. The competition on the Stairway of Star also came into view. At this moment, the competition between Cursed Goddess Soul, Hutu, and you was exposed to everyone in Void City. At the top of the Stairway of Star was a throne. It was the throne of Void City. At this moment, everyone understood. Whoever sat on the throne first would be the ruler of Void City. An uproar broke out among the nobles in an instant. The few dukes widened their eyes. Duchess Yunlan put a hand to her forehead. You didn't let me down. You're indeed the last of the three cursed goddesses. Duchess Nightmare, on the other hand, looked extremely nervous. Huda was following closely behind Cursed Goddess Soul. In the prison of Void, the true forms of the three imprisoned great soul overlords were hissing and roaring. They stared at the Void. They watched as Soul took the lead to step by step toward the throne. Their originally dead thoughts were rekindled from the dead. If Soul sat on the throne, there would still be hope for the Soul Demon's 1,000-year hegemony. Everyone was watching nervously. Every step of the Stairway of Star was tugging at their hearts. Everyone knew it. They were witnessing the birth of the new Queen of Curses. However, the current situation, could it really be Soul? The 92nd step of the Stairway of Star, Soul. The 91st step of the Stairway of Star, Hutu. The 56th step of the Stairway of Star, You. Suddenly, there seemed to be no suspense in the ranking. Hutu gritted her teeth and followed behind Soul. The higher she climbed, the more terrifying the aura emanating from the Stairway of Star became. It was so terrifying that it was very difficult for them to even lift their feet. Perhaps only by circulating the bloodline of the cursed goddess in her body could she climb up. Hutu did not want to lose. If she lost, the war between the primitive universe and the soul demon universe would be rewritten, and that was not what she wanted to see. Soul's eyes were filled with excitement. With great difficulty, she climbed one step after another. The throne of Void City was getting closer and closer to her. All the people who were watching could not help but clench their fists. Who would the throne belong to? Bu Fong was also staring. Suddenly, the corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched slightly. He found that Yu, who was hanging at the bottom, took a deep breath and took out a biscuit from her pocket. She glanced up and finally took a bite of the biscuit in her hand. Chapter 1779. Yu hesitated for a long time, but in the end, she ate the flatbread. It was the fortune flatbread that Bu Fong had left for her. There were only 2 in total, and she had eaten one before. Now this was the last one. However, she looked at Soul and Hudu, who were almost at the top of the Stairway of Star. You still thought that eating the flatbread was the best option. Perhaps, after eating it, she would have a chance to make a breakthrough. Otherwise, she would have no chance at all. In the beginning, you wanted to see the result of the competition between Soul and Hutu. She did not want Soul to sit on the throne, and it would be best if Hutu could beat Soul. However, from the beginning to the end, Hutu had been suppressed by Soul. If this went on, Hutu basically had no chance of beating Soul. And that was indeed the case. Hutu felt exhausted. The throne seemed to become illusory in her eyes, getting farther and farther away from her. Soul, on the other hand, was tired, but her eyes were firm. It seemed that she still had some leeway. She took a step forward. She glanced over her shoulder at Hutu, who was behind her. She gasped for breath and smiled. "It's a pity that you've lost," Soul said. "The throne of Void City belongs to me." As soon as her voice rang out, she sped up. The experts of Void City burst into an uproar of despair. Everyone could sense Soul's ambition. She had lured an army of soul demons into Void City, which was an act that would destroy the city in a day. Therefore, the nobles did not want Soul to sit on the throne. Otherwise, what was the purpose of so many of them fighting so desperately against the soul demons? Wherever they went, the universe would collapse, and all living beings would be plunged into misery and suffering. They were synonymous with destruction. How could Void City become a paradise for such creatures? However, many nobles were in despair. Soul was still suppressing Hutu, and as time went by, she was getting closer and closer to the throne. For the experts of Void City, hope was getting slimmer and slimmer. Duchess Nightmare clenched her fists tightly. She was so nervous that she could hardly breathe. Lord Go and the others were relatively calm when the time came. Of course, this is also because the gap between us is too big. Otherwise, they might have been as excited as Duchess Nightmare. After all, you are an acquaintance of theirs. Sigh, it seems like everything has been decided. Kersey leaned against the door and looked at the competition on the Stairway of Star. She could not help but sigh. Although Hutu carried the hope, the gap between them was not so easy to make up. Cursed Goddess Soul's cultivation base was profound to begin with, and now that she had broken through to the level of a chaotic saint, her victory was basically assured. As the will of the queen, can't you control the person who inherits the throne? Bu Fong looked at Kersey in confusion. Aren't you afraid that Cursed Goddess Soul will destroy Void City after she sits on the throne? I'm afraid, but there's no point in being afraid. The little lowly pouted. I'm just an avatar of the queen's will. I don't have power or authority. What can I do? I'm desperate too. Bu Fong, there's no other way. We have to get ready. Once Soul inherits the throne, the soul demons will definitely sweep through Void City. Kersey heaved a sigh, feeling a little helpless. Don't worry, it's not the end yet. The outcome is still unknown. Bufong frowned and looked at you. Don't tell me you still have hope in you? Soul has climbed to the 90th step, but she's still at the 60th. There's no way she can turn the tables. Kersey was somewhat speechless. Bufong glanced at her. That's hard to say. The fortune flatbread is still in Yu's hand. With the fortune flatbread in hand, anything was possible. Bufong's eyes lit up when he saw you eating the flatbread on the stairway of Star. After taking a bite of the flatbread, Yu's aura changed abruptly. It was as if a wave of air had wrapped around her, making her body stand tall and straight. A powerful aura kept surging around her. Yu's eyes became deep, and a crystal core formed between her brows. His pitch-black hair was fluttering in the wind. Her red lips parted slightly. You glanced around and rested her eyes on Soul and Hutu, who were at the top of the stairway of Star. Then, she strode forward with her long, fair legs. With every step she took, the stairway of Star seemed to tremble. Rumble. You shot up like a rocket in an instant. The fortune flatbread seemed to have produced some amazing effect again. Oh, naturally, many people also paid attention to Nethery. Everyone sucked in a cold breath because Yu's temperament had suddenly changed. 1 step, 3 steps. She walked as fast as she could on the stairway of Star. Everyone was in an uproar. Duchess Yunlan, who was holding her forehead with one hand, paused and could not help looking over. What happened? Duchess Yunlan could not help but murmur as she looked at you, who had suddenly erupted. Has this girl been pretending to be weak all this time? Why did she only erupt now? Is she going to play a trick on us? What if we lose? The whole Void City will fall into eternal damnation. Hades' era and Lord Go were excited. Many nobles seemed to see hope, even if the hope was slim. After all, the gap between them was too great. You took 3 steps at a time. Even if you catch up, it will take you at least 10 steps. Soul, on the other hand, might have reached the top a long time ago. She could not catch up. Many people shook their heads in despair. The soul demons also cried out in alarm. The 3 great soul overlords imprisoned in the cage of nothingness roared at the top of their lungs. Soul sitting on the throne was their only hope to get out of the cage. They had pinned all their hopes on Soul. Naturally, they did not want any variables to appear. With her hands clasped behind her back, you took 1 step at a time. Her speed was neither fast nor slow. If you were a docile kitten before, you were now like a running cheetah. Hutu's scalp tightened. She glanced over her shoulder and met Yu's deep gaze, which almost made her fall. Soul, on the other hand, felt her hair stand on end. After glancing at you, she sped up without hesitation. She would not give up. The throne of Void City belonged to her. How is this possible? Did you cheat? Kersey was bewildered. She even wondered if she was a jinx now. She had said that Soul would win. Could it be that Soul was really going to turn the tables? Can I cheat? Bufong glanced at her. Besides, eating a biscuit to replenish your strength when you're tired is also considered cheating. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. Kersey was speechless. So Yu's outburst has something to do with this chef. You ran as fast as you could. The nobles' hearts were in their throats. The soul demons growled as well. After all, the result of the stairway of Star could affect the final situation. The nobles, who were used to betting on a race, could not help but feel excited at this moment. After all, the future of Void City was at stake this time. A look of joy came over Hutu's face. As long as it was not Soul who sat on the throne, everything would be fine. Even if it was not her, she did not care. Her purpose in coming to Void City was to stop Soul and the soul demons. It's up to you now, Hutu said, looking at you. At this moment, Nethery had arrived at her position. You had forced her to a tie. However, you did not slow down at all. You were still walking steadily, taking 3 steps with each step. You gave Hutu a deep look. When their eyes met, she nodded faintly. She took a step forward, and a gust of fragrance surged as she sped forward. The 97th step of the stairway of Star. Soul. The 92nd step of the stairway of Star. You. As for Hutu, She had given up the competition. She had pinned all her hopes on you. How was this possible? Soul glanced over her shoulder and saw Nethery's approaching figure. How could she be so fast? Wasn't she struggling at the 60th step just now? No, I won't lose. I can't lose. Soul's eyes narrowed as she roared. She had put in so much effort and sacrificed everything for this moment. How could she fail at this moment? Using both hands and feet, Soul clenched her teeth as she climbed up. Her forehead was covered in sweat, and her entire body was soaked in sweat. The atmosphere became more and more stagnant. Countless people were staring at the projection of the stairway of star in silence. They wanted to know the final outcome. Yu's rise was beyond everyone's expectations. However, those who were familiar with you were not surprised. After all, behind Soul stood the Soul Demon Universe. However, behind you stood Bufong. Duchess Yunlan's eyes flickered. She had figured out the reason. She did not expect that the chef, whom she had looked down on, could really help you to this extent. She remembered that the chef had said enough in front of Soul. He alone was equivalent to an entire army. Perhaps the current Soul was deeply moved by this. Rumble. Nethery's speed also slowed down. 1 step, 2 steps, however, she had caught up with Soul. The gap between them was only 1 step. Soul's 98th step. Yu's 97th step. Every step he took was extremely difficult and painful. I won't lose. Soul growled. The power of sin spread over her and seemed to turn into a vague figure. Her eyes were scarlet as she took a step forward. She rushed to the 99th step. She was only 1 step away from the throne. Yu's face was calm, and the crystal core on her forehead was glowing. She clasped her hands behind her back as if she had learned calmness from Bufong. She took a step forward. She had reached the same level as Soul. Plop, plop. Soul's heart was beating very fast. At this moment, she felt that everything around her was silent except for her rapid breathing. Everyone was quiet, including Bufong and Kersey. Soul's face was ferocious, and her eyes were dark. The power of sin in her had turned into a mighty demon. Yu was very calm. She clasped her hands behind her back and looked very calm. They stood on the 99th step of the stairway of star at the same time. Behind them was Hutu, whose eyes and mouth were wide open. Both of them lifted their feet at the same time. Everything seemed to be slowed down. Soul's pupils constricted, and the demon behind her was roaring. Nethery's long, white, and tender legs seemed to shake under the slow speed of the blood. Their movements were almost synchronized. They lifted their feet landed bam. A deafening sound rang out. Soul's feet and Yu's feet landed in front of the throne at the same time. It was too fast, too synchronized. Many people were dumbfounded. At the same time, how could they judge? Who would win and who would lose? Who would be the winner and sit on the throne? Nethery's clothes fluttered in the wind. Her hair fluttered, and the crystal core between her eyebrows shattered with a crack. At this moment, the effect of the fortune flatbread had come, accompanied by a rumbling sound. Under everyone's gazes, the shadow of the stairway of star, it trembled violently. Thousands of streams of light burst out from the ethereal throne. The final winner was finally going to come out. Chapter 1780. The battle for the throne had finally come to an end. However, the suspense was still there, because no one knew who the final victor would be. Was it you, or was it cursed goddess Soul? Both of their feet stepped onto the 100th step almost at the same time. At that moment, the light was dazzling and the starry sky trembled. Bufong narrowed his eyes and stared at the throne. Kersey could not help craning her neck. The throne was very important. After all, it determined the future of Void City and the life and death of many universes. Duchess Nightmare's eyes widened. Duchess Yunlan was also breathing rapidly. She covered her mouth with one hand, and her chest was heaving up and down. Lord Ghost stuck out his tongue, and Hades' era almost dropped the spicy strip between his lips. In the distance, the 3 great soul overlords imprisoned in the cage of void were dumbfounded. How could this be? Wasn't victory in hand? Shouldn't it be a crushing defeat? Why was there such a tie? That cursed goddess was so weak. How could she catch up with Soul? The palm of Gluttony, great Soul, Overlord's true form, could not help but touch the edge of the cage. A ripping sound rang out as his palm was cut off, causing him to howl miserably. A piece of his true form had been cut off, which was a serious injury to him. However, he could not care less. He needed to know the final result. Everything they had done was for this moment. Countless soul demons were panting violently. Hutu was transfixed as she stared blankly at the two figures in front of her. Then, a great repulsive force erupted, pushing her away from the stairway of star. As a result, her body fell to the ground. At the highest point, the light was dazzling. The throne seemed to be choosing their final destination. Under everyone's watchful eyes, the light finally began to change. Soul turned her head and stared at you. Her black eyes were shining brightly. You, on the other hand, were very calm. Rumble. Suddenly, Void City began to tremble. The expressions of Bufong and Kersey flickered. It's begun. Kersey's breathing quickened as she shouted excitedly. Bufong froze. Hutu raised her head. Countless people were watching. A wisp of extremely pure curse energy rose from the throne into the sky. Then, it bloomed in the void and turned into a stream of light. That flowing light was constantly twisting, like a fluttering phoenix, a graceful divine sparrow. Suddenly, the phoenix spread its wings. It turned into the figure of a woman. That woman's figure was noble and peaceful, as if she wanted to embrace the world. She crossed her arms and slowly floated down from the sky. This was a woman formed from the aura of curses. She landed in front of you in Soul. Her choice seemed to determine the final ruler of Void City. Soul's breathing quickened. She stared fixedly at the figure, transformed from the curse energy. This was the Queen's will, the will to find an heir. With the promise of this will, she would be able to sit on the throne and become the ruler of Void City. Supreme and supreme. Choose me. It's the fastest I've ever reached. Choose me. I've been ahead all the way. Why can't you choose me? I'm better than her. Soul's voice became a little hoarse. You watched indifferently and did not argue. She stuck out her tongue and licked her lips. She wanted to eat another fortune flatbread. Buzz, suddenly, a look of excitement came over Soul's face. Because the woman formed by the pure power of the curse looked at her and slowly raised her hand. This scene caused everyone to be in disbelief. A look of despair came over the faces of many nobles of Void City. Dukes, marquises, counts, viscounts, and many others were in despair. They did not dare to imagine what would happen if Void City fell into Soul's hands. Would it really become a paradise for soul demons? Would all of them become prisoners of the soul demons? Despair, sorrow filled everyone's hearts. In the cage, the three great soul overlords roared excitedly. The soul demons growled as well. Their terrible voices shook the whole Void City. A happy smile came over Soul's face. That's right. Choose me. I'm the most suitable heir. She looked at the arm of the cursed woman, who kept approaching her. She could no longer hide the excitement on her face. Sure enough, she was the winner. How could a woman who relied on a chef be better than her? Oh! Suddenly, Soul's body shook violently. That was because the cursed woman had raised her hand and placed a slender finger between her eyebrows. Then, she slowly pushed it forward. Soul froze. She felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. In a flash, her mind and soul seemed to be stripped away, and her blood was frozen. Rumble. A huge force that she couldn't resist exploded. As a result, her figure was directly knocked down from the stairway of starry sky. No, it was accompanied by a cry of disbelief. Soul kept struggling, clawing at her arms and legs in front of her. Rumble. Unfortunately, a rumbling sound rang out, but she was still smashed to the ground. You froze for a moment. The woman formed by the power of the curse floated in front of her like a pure, elemental spirit. She spread her arms. What are you doing? Nethery was taken aback. Suddenly, she looked at the woman transformed from the curse power with a vigilant face. However, The latter suddenly pounced on her, and in an instant, like flowing water, he fused into her body. The throne changed abruptly. Nethery felt that there was a tremendous force supporting her. There seemed to be countless voices ringing in her head. That voice seemed to be whispering, singing, and also like the whispers of best friends. Yu's eyes were blank. Her body was being protected as she slowly floated towards the throne. The black dress she was wearing changed. The originally plain, long dress suddenly seemed to have small black phoenixes landing on it, causing the dress to become graceful and noble. Her hair waved and coiled around the top of her head. Her fair legs were no longer exposed. They were wrapped in the dress, and the back of the dress became extremely long and narrow. Gradually, it covered her back like a black cloth that blotted out the sky. However, the cloth was covered with strange patterns. Everyone was stunned. They stared blankly at the scene. No one dared to breathe too loudly or make a sound. You stood on the throne, slightly dumbfounded. So was she victorious? So, she had become the heir of Void City. The heir of a piece of biscuit? You had a strange expression on her face. An irresistible force seemed to fall on her shoulders, causing her to slowly sit on the throne. The moment she sat on the throne, the whole Void City seemed to be boiling with excitement. Rumble. Outside Void City, a huge bone ship soared into the sky. A huge black phoenix that blotted out the sky spread its wings and flew. A huge black dragon let out a dragon roar and stretched across the starry sky. Void City. It was as if it had been completely revived. The destroyed buildings were quickly restored to their original state at a speed visible to the naked eye. Kersey stared blankly at you, who was sitting on the throne. She's really a poisonous healer. Huta clenched her fists excitedly. She actually won. She did not know how the outcome was decided in the end. But, no matter what, it was good that she won. Buffon clasped his hands behind his back. The corners of his mouth curved upward slightly as he looked at you, who was sitting on the throne. He breathed a sigh of relief. By the looks of it, you are going to become the queen of Void City, aren't you? Many years later, you might become the legendary Queen of Curses? The thought of it made him somewhat excited. In the distance, Sol rolled to her feet and let out a heart-wrenching roar. Why? Why? How could she have lost? That woman relied on a chef. How could she win? I don't accept this. I don't accept this. Sol was so angry that she went mad. Her eyes turned scarlet and black in an instant. Wisps of sinful power burst out of her and enveloped her in an instant. Then, she soared into the sky. At this moment, she was like a monstrous demon. She stepped on the ground and soared into the sky, step by step. Then, she went straight toward you, who was sitting on the throne. Rumble. Black smoke billowed. Sol stepped on the black smoke and faced you directly. They looked at each other as equals, and their auras fluctuated violently. Outside the palace, cheers resounded through Void City in a flash. They never thought that. Their hearts were beating fast. Some nobles wept with joy. They had seen everything that the soul demons had done after entering Void City. If they really allowed the soul demons to roam freely in the city, it would not be long before the city turned into a land of death. However, they did not have to worry about that now. The soul demons were defeated. The army of soul demons howled miserably. The three great soul overlords also cried out in disbelief. Defeated? Sol was defeated. She was defeated by that weak, cursed goddess. Duchess Nightmare let out a long roar. She was very excited. Duchess Yunlan stood rooted to the spot. She needed some time to calm down. That chef really helped you ascend to the throne. Lord Go twitched his mouth. Hades' era danced with excitement. Little Hu, on the other hand, jumped up and down on Xiao Bai's shoulder. Xiaopi lay on his stomach and slowly blew a bubble. With a pop, the bubble burst. Buffon's emotions were somewhat complicated. However, when he saw Sol confronting you, he frowned. He was about to go up and help. However, he was stopped by Kersey. What are you doing? You don't need your help now, Kersey said with a smile. Kersey seemed very happy as she said with a smile. Oh, Buffon raised his brows slightly. What does this little girl mean? In midair, Soul, stepping on the black cloud of sin, roared at you. A black ball appeared in her hand. The branches of the soul-devouring tree emerged from it. They turned into thousands of sharp spears, all pointing at the graceful and noble you sitting on the throne. The throne is mine. No one can take it away from me. Soul roared. She didn't dare. She was angry. She roared, and she was afraid. She was worried that her failure would disappoint that person. Rumble. A terrible aura rolled, and the cultivation base of a chaotic saint erupted to the fullest. Then, like a rain of arrows, the spears of the soul-devouring tree rained down on you. They wanted to devour you in an instant. Bufong frowned. Kersey was very calm. As the rain of arrows approached, the void began to shatter. Sitting on the throne, however, little Yo was very calm. It was a calmness that came from the inside out. She raised a hand. She pointed at the void with her fair hand. Then the rain of tens of thousands of arrows came to a halt at this moment. They could not fall even an inch. You raised her chin and waved her hand. The sound of ice crystals shattering rang out. Countless black, soul-devouring spears burst into pieces. You flipped her hand. In her hand, a round, black gem appeared. It was a very noble black, the kind that seemed to devour all darkness. This is the symbol of the Queen of Void City, the #1 treasure of Void City, the weapon of the Queen of Curses, the Cursed Stone. The little lowly Kersey screamed excitedly. As she screamed, she jumped around nonstop. Crack, crack. You spread her palm and gave a thought. Immediately, something materialized in front of her body. It was condensed from the purest power of curses. It turned into a small boat. Bufong paused, and so did Lord Go, Hades Era, and the others. It was the Netherworld ship. The cursed stone in Yu's hand flew out and embedded itself in the center of the Netherworld ship. You landed on the deck of the Netherworld ship and stood there. Bufong was a little absent-minded. She looked just like the Netherworld woman he had met for the first time in the Relic. Standing on the Netherworld ship, you slowly pointed a finger. Boom! An unparalleled power burst forth. Soul's pupils constricted. Everything around his body exploded with a loud bang. The black ball in his hand also exploded. A withered soul-devouring tree branch fell from it, turning into ashes. Slash! She spat out blood. She flew out of the palace. She landed outside the palace. It fell in front of everyone's eyes. Chapter 1781. One move. Cursed Goddess Soul could not resist it at all, and she was knocked flying backward. Yu's cultivation base was no longer as weak as before. Sitting on the throne, she seemed to have gained the approval of the whole Void City. Her strength was also extraordinary. After all, with the Cursed Stone, a supreme treasure of the universe, it was not surprising that her strength had improved. Everyone was dumbfounded. They stared blankly at Soul, who was flying backward. Soul, who was in high spirits, was defeated, and she was utterly defeated. The moment you sat on the throne, she did not even have the strength to fight back. She had defeated her with just one finger. The cursed goddess, who was once the most promising candidate to sit on the throne, was now reduced to such a miserable state. The nobles of Void City were silent. They felt inexplicably sad for Soul. However, Soul had brought this upon herself. If she had not forced her again and again, she would have brought in an army of soul demons. She would not have brought in an army of soul demons and turned Void City into a world of soul demons. She would not have been betrayed by her friends and family and ended up in such a miserable state. The three great soul overlords hissed, surprised and despairing. Their last hope was completely ended when Soul was knocked flying backward. The army of soul demons panicked. Soul's defeat meant their defeat. All people of Void City, listen up. Kill the soul demons. Rumble, a deafening voice rang out. Above the huge, towering stairway of Star, a black ship was floating in the air. Nethery stood there, her beauty peerless. Her eyes were cold and noble. A green crystal was slowly condensing on her forehead, just like when she ate the fortune flatbread. However, compared to that time, she was even more dazzling now, and her aura was wilder. She did have the demeanor of a queen. At the entrance of the palace, Bufong put his hands behind his back. Looking at you, who was a peerless beauty, he could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. You are finally sitting on the throne. The competition for the position of cursed goddess had come to an end. Hutu stood up. She was not disappointed. As long as the Queen of Curse's throne did not fall into Soul's hands, she did not care. Bufong looked at the little girl. So, what are you going to do next? Bufong looked at the little girl and asked, will you disappear? After all, the will of the Queen of Curses has been inherited. Kersey rolled her eyes. I'm an independent entity. Why would I disappear? It's scary to be uneducated. An independent individual, understand? You stood on the Netherworld ship, her gaze falling on Bufong from afar. Complicated emotions permeated the palace for a moment. Rumble outside. At Nethery's order, the demonic Dragon King's Hall Master turned around. Void City was unprecedentedly unified, and many nobles who were watching the show also made their moves. It transformed into a raging tide that engulfed the world. The army of soul demons had long lost their morale, and they had no power to resist. Their 3 leaders had been captured. What other strength did they have to resist? With what capital to resist? Hordes of soul demons were killed in the void. This was the price they had to pay. Void City was not a kind place. Since they were ready to invade, they had to be prepared to be killed instead. The eyes of the 3 great soul overlords turned red as they watched, but they were trapped in the cage of nothingness and could not escape. Cursed Goddess Soul staggered to her feet. Blood trickled from the corners of her mouth. She raised her hand, but the black orb could no longer form. Her face was ashen, and she had nothing to live for. It was as if all her faith had been shattered at this moment. She had lost her faith. She had lost. She had been utterly defeated. She had been utterly defeated. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan walked slowly. The chaos of the soul demons was basically over. Now, it was time to deal with Soul. She had to pay the price she had to pay. She moved as if she was teleporting. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan had locked down Soul's escape routes. However, Soul did not try to escape because she knew she could not. She looked up with her ashen eyes, glanced at Duchess Yunlan and Duchess Nightmare, and suddenly burst out laughing. You've only won for the time being. You can't stop anything. I'm not the one sitting on the throne, and you'll regret it. Sooner or later, Void City will be reduced to ruins and the dust of the universe. Soul gave a shrill laugh. How dare you? Duchess Nightmare focused her eyes. She struck out in an instant. She was so fast that she appeared in front of Soul in a flash. She grabbed Soul by the neck and lifted her up. Soul did not resist. She turned to look at the palace, at the shadow of the stairway of star reflected above it, and at you, who was standing on the Netherworld ship. There was a look of reluctance in her eyes. Suddenly, her pupils constricted as she looked at the palace's entrance. There, clad in a striped red and white vermilion robe, Bufong walked slowly out of the palace. This chef, when Soul saw him, she thought of many things in an instant. How did you defeat her? Isn't it all because of this chef? This damn chef had changed everything. He had made all her efforts go down the drain. If it weren't for him, everything would have gone according to her script. She was furious. She hated him. However, she was getting more and more powerless now. I alone am like an army. I can make Nethery sit on the throne, Bufong said. Those were the chef's indifferent words. Soul had never taken it seriously, and she had never cared about it. However, now all of this had actually come true. That chef had actually done everything he had said. Puffed. Soul coughed up a mouthful of blood. She was so angry. How ironic. The Queen of Curses hates chefs so much, but the heir to the throne in the end has a chef as her backer. How ridiculous. Don't get cocky, you chef. The Soul God will not spare you, Soul said. You're still so arrogant. Duchess Nightmare's eyes flashed fiercely. This soul has almost brought destruction to Void City. The little girl and Huta walked out, and stood at Bufong's side. Looking at Soul in Duchess Nightmare's hand, Bufong breathed a sigh of relief. Just when Duchess Nightmare was about to kill Soul, suddenly she froze. She looked down and saw that 1, 2, and 3 petals were quietly blooming under her feet. Oh! Duchess Nightmare's expression changed dramatically. The petals turned sharp in an instant, soared into the sky from the ground, and cut through her body in a flash. Slash! Blood flowed like a fountain. Duchess Nightmare was knocked flying backward. Tianlian, she hissed. Soul fell to the ground, supported by an invisible force. A plaintive sigh rang out. Petals began to condense around Duchess Tianlian in an instant. There was a look of pity in Duchess Tianlian's eyes as she looked at the downtrodden Soul. Run. I'll hold them off, she said. I watched you grow up. I watched you grow up. I don't want you to die like this. If you survive in the future, I hope you can stay in Void City. After all, this used to be your home. Duchess Tianlian looked at Soul. Home. The corner of Soul's mouth twitched coldly. In the distance, Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan did not expect Duchess Tianlian to show up at this time. They stepped forward. However, the terrifying petals spread and forced them back in an instant. The petals rolled out of Duchess Tianlian's body like a tornado, enveloping a vast area in front of her. One after another, the petals wrapped around Soul and carried her out of Void City. You're crazy. The throne is already taken. The dispute between the cursed goddesses is over. Why are you still protecting her? Duchess Nightmare said coldly. Black chi spread around her body. Duchess Yunlan also attacked with a cold face. She felt that Duchess Tianlian was really possessed. Duchess Tianlian did not speak. Amid the thousands of petals, a face appeared. It was a lovely face. Fight! The 3 dukes fought fiercely. However, Duchess Tianlian, who had unleashed all her origins, was much stronger than Duchess Nightmare and Yunlan. Wrapped in the petals, Soul watched the battle below. Around her, the army of soul demons was wiped out. The nobles glanced at her with cold eyes. This is the fate of the loser. As she looked at Duchess Tianlian, who was fighting fiercely, there was a hint of sorrow in her eyes. Bam! A deafening bestial roar rang out. The ground shook. A peerless savage beast leaped up and swooped toward her. It was the great ape that Marquis Lang Gu had transformed into. He had struck at this moment. A huge palm came slapping toward Soul. He wanted to keep her here. It's useless to keep me here. Marchioness Modi's death. You can't reverse it. Soul sneered. Bam! The great ape's palm slapped the petals spinning around Soul. Slash! Slash! The petals became as sharp as knives to grind flesh. His flesh and blood were constantly being torn to shreds. However, the great ape's eyes were still fierce, and he let out a furious roar. Then he slapped down with both palms. Bam! Regardless of the blood that spilled, he smashed the defense Duchess Tianlian had deployed. The petals withered and fell to the ground. In the distance, Duchess Tianlian's pupils constricted. No! Duchess Tianlian roared. Tianlian, you've gone mad. Duchess Nightmare was utterly disappointed. In the distance, Soul's face was indifferent. Although her defense was broken and the gust of wind spewed out of the great ape's mouth almost blew her away, but she was unexpectedly calm. I'm going to die. It's a pity that I can't see His Excellency. Many scenes flashed before Soul's eyes. They were scenes of her struggling to survive in the Soul Demon universe. At that time, a man had saved her, trained her, and brought her to the top of the world. However, everything had turned into darkness. All that was left was a beating black ball, which was given to her by that man. Unfortunately, she did not manage to protect it. Roar! Everything returned to reality. Soul watched calmly. She watched as Marquis Lang Gu's huge mouth came down toward her. Rumble! The whole world fell silent. Duchess Tianlian's pupils constricted. The nobles were stunned as well. Bufong narrowed his eyes, and Hutu had a complicated look on his face. The great ape closed his mouth and swallowed Soul. The outcome was self-evident. Oh! Suddenly, just when everyone thought Soul was going to die, the great ape's mouth suddenly burst open. The giant ape's mountain-like body suddenly collapsed and smashed into the ground. A rumbling sound rang out, kicking up a cloud of dust. In midair, a pitch-black crack slowly healed. Meanwhile, in front of Soul, it was a tall and sturdy figure. It was the figure of a giant crocodile, with its tail and head drooping. Behind the crocodile was Soul. She had just opened her eyes, and she looked a little confused. Ezra. Bufong paused for a moment. Isn't that Ezra, who possesses Heaven God Transmigration's soul and was sent to the Soul Demon universe? Why is he here? No, it's not Ezra. Bufong's pupils constricted as he sucked in a cold breath. Ezra's drooping head split open between his eyebrows. Slowly, it was pulled to both sides. Mucus and blood kept flowing out of it. Meanwhile, a figure slowly emerged from Ezra's body. Who? Everyone was stunned. Could it be Soul God? Chapter 1782. Soul God? The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched as he glanced at the little girl at his side. She can't be so poisonous, can she? Can the almighty Soul God be awakened by the poison? But he shouldn't be. Bufong focused his eyes. It was more likely that it was Heaven God Transmigration. After all, the soul in Ezra's body was Heaven God Transmigration. However, why did Heaven God Transmigration save Soul? He did not hesitate to return to Void City, where he had already escaped. What was the reason? This was one of the things that puzzled Bufong. In midair, Ezra's body was torn in half. Slowly, a figure emerged. His slender black hair, which was stained with mucus, draped over his shoulders and looked somewhat disgusting. The sound of panting rang through heaven and earth. Everyone stopped what they were doing and stared at the sky in shock. Soul was still a little confused. She thought she was going to die, but she did not expect that she was not dead. She had survived. Her eyes rolled as she looked at the figure in front of her. The power of sin spread like little snakes, coiling around his body. The man slowly raised his head. He didn't have a face, legs, or even an arm. Only one arm was left. This situation caused everyone's hair to stand on end. What's going on? Faceless, one-armed. Where did this guy come from? A deafening rumble rang out. A terrible rumble swept out. Marquis Lang goose smashed to the ground. His mouth was full of blood as he retreated from his peerless demon form and transformed back into a human, rolling and wailing on the ground. Both Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan took deep breaths. Who is that? Duchess Tianlian breathed a sigh of relief. Soul was not dead, and Void City was saved. Soul, let's go, said Duchess Tianlian. Her figure once again turned into fluttering petals, entangling the two dukes. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan attacked bravely, bombarding Duchess Tianlian until she kept coughing blood. In midair, the figure raised his single arm and ran his fingers through his hair. Although he didn't have a face, everyone could feel an immense pressure from his gaze. Many people's hearts sank. Marquis Lang Gu quickly recovered from his injuries. After all, he was a chaotic saint-level existence. He stood up and looked at the one-armed, faceless existence in fear. Only he knew how terrifying the aura that burst out from that person was. It seemed like he was even stronger than a duke. A few nearby nobles narrowed their eyes. They were all saints of the Great Path. However, Soul's aura was very weak now, and she had even fallen to the level of a saint of the Great Path. They had a chance to subdue her. Zhang Xian thought. The nobles charged towards Soul and the one-armed, faceless man. Marquis Lang Gu narrowed his eyes. Everyone present sucked in a breath of cold air as their pupils shrank. Bufong frowned. He raised his head and looked at the faceless man in the void. That man gave him an extremely oppressive aura. Boom! A few saints of the Great Path, who were approaching, emitted towering auras as they sped away like comets. However, at the moment when it approached, the faceless man raised his only arm. Then, he gently waved it forward. Boom! Without warning, the bodies of the saints of the Great Path exploded. blood and flesh filled the sky, and even his soul cracked open, turning into pure soul force that was absorbed by the faceless man. Hiss! One strike? Did he just kill a few saints of the Great Path so easily? It was as easy as swatting a fly. Who was this man? Even the three great soul overlords imprisoned in the cage of nothingness in the distance felt their hair stand on end. They did not know who the man in front of them was. However, since he had saved Soul, perhaps he was from their camp. Soul stared blankly at the figure in front of her. The latter's featureless face squirmed as if it was burping. Then, he raised a hand and touched Soul's head, his gesture affectionate and gentle. Soul's body trembled violently. The next moment, her eyes turned red, and tears began to roll down her cheeks. My lord, Soul was choking with emotion. She could not be mistaken about that familiar aura. It was the aura of the man who had taken her to see the highest scenery of the soul demon universe. It was the aura of the man who had brought her light in the darkness. How could she be mistaken? His aura was countless times weaker, and even his features, face, and body had disappeared. But she recognized him. Soul called him my lord. In the cage of nothingness, the three great soul overlords were dumbstruck. The next moment, they trembled all over, too excited to speak. My lord, soul god. Is it really, my lord? The three great soul overlords and even the many soul demons in the distance were extremely excited at this moment. The experts of Void City were taken aback. Duchess Tianlian's pupils constricted. The next moment, her body turned cold. He's here. That man is here. Duchess Nightmare narrowed her eyes. Are you the crocodile man who escaped? The Queen of Curses had ordered her to hunt down the crocodile man, but in the end, he was rescued by the almighty experts of the soul demon universe. The almighty expert was too strong. If her guess was right, he should be the strongest great soul overlord in the soul demon universe. However, she didn't expect that this crocodile man actually came back, and there was such a monster crawling out of his body. But suddenly, Lord Go and Hades' era's bodies flashed. They appeared around Buffon. Both of their expressions were extremely grave. Xiao Bai and Little Hu also gathered together. What happened? When Buffon saw Lord Go, Hades' era, and even Little Hu, whose hair was standing on end, he couldn't help but frown. This fellow is the owner of the arm that shattered the primal chaos and collapsed the heavenly deity palace. That aura, it's exactly the same. We can't be mistaken. Buffon was stunned. Then he sucked in a cold breath. Buffon had long speculated that the existence who smashed the primal chaos and destroyed several heavenly deity palaces was Soul God. Is this faceless, one-armed man really Soul God? If that's the case, that's really bad. Heaven God Transmigration, that weakling, it seems that he has been devoured by Soul God's awakened will. Soul God is an existence on the same level as the Queen of Curses. Although you have inherited the Queen's will and ascended to the throne, she is not the Queen of Curses yet. But she wasn't the Queen of Curses yet, so she couldn't stop Soul God. In the sky, Soul wept bitterly. It was as if she had finally released her emotions after suppressing them for a long time. Your Excellency, you're finally back. Soul wept both sadly and happily. The faceless man rubbed her head. The atmosphere was very peaceful. Duchess Tianlian's face was deathly pale. She was in despair. The Queen of Curses was still asleep. How were they going to stop Soul God? She had always thought that only Soul was the most suitable heir who could save Void City from the Soul Demon disaster, even though she had lured an army of Soul Demons here. However, as long as Soul was alive, Void City would never be destroyed. She knew the relationship between Soul and the supreme existence in the Soul Demon universe. What should I do? There's really no other way now. Damn it. Duchess Nightmare's aura fluctuated violently. Holding a long mace in her hand, she soared into the sky and swung it at the faceless, one-armed man. The curse power spread over the black mace and turned into a multicolored savage beast that blotted out the sky. The one-armed man was still rubbing Soul's head. As Duchess Nightmare approached, The man finally turned his head slowly. His face was facing Duchess Nightmare. His featureless face seemed to exude an evil aura. Then the power of 7 sins emerged behind the man. Each of the sinful energy twisted into a sharp spear. With a ripping sound, it pierced through Duchess Nightmare's body. It was so fast that it pierced through her body almost instantly, leaving her no time to react. Duchess Nightmare's pupils constricted. The curse power in her was compressed and could not be activated at all. Damn it, Duchess Nightmare hissed. Bam! However, the spears formed from the power of the great sins kept stabbing into her body. Her body kept twisting and trembling from being pricked, blood spilled. Rumble. Finally, he struck her with a horizontal blow. Her fleshly body was torn apart in an instant. She was the mighty Duchess Nightmare, a top existence in Void City, an invincible duke. Just like that, her fleshly body was torn apart. Black smoke spread, and Duchess Nightmare's soul flew out. She was about to flee. However, the faceless, one-armed man seemed to have been waiting for this moment. He raised his arm. His palms split open and seemed to turn into a mouth filled with sharp teeth. A powerful suction erupted from the mouth, trying to suck Duchess Nightmare's soul into it. Was a duchess going to fall just like that? An incomparably terrible aura pervaded the sky. An aura of despair enveloped her in an instant. Soul God. This faceless, one-armed man is actually Soul God. He was in existence at the same level as the Queen of Curses. Duchess Nightmare had been killed in an instant. Duchess Nightmare howled miserably. Duchess Tianlian soared into the sky. No! Soul! Stop her! Duchess Nightmare can't die. There was a pleading look in Duchess Tianlian's eyes. Marquises and counts could die in Void City, but dukes could not. But they could not allow a duke to die. Once a duke died, Void City would truly decline. Aunt Lien, I'm grateful for what you've done for me, but you can't save Void City. A cold look appeared in Soul's eyes. Her gaze sent a chill down Duchess Tianlian's spine. The faceless man's will seem to be a little hazy. The next moment, the spear made of the power of the great sins shot out in an instant. With a ripping sound, it pierced through Duchess Tianlian's body. Duchess Tianlian's face was ashen. Soul's expression did not change. She only had eyes for the man in front of her. She knew he did not like people to change his mind, so she did nothing. Little chef, give me the death spicy strip. Duchess Tianlian is a fool, but she's right. A duke cannot die in Void City. The little girl at Bufong's side had a very serious face. She said to Bufong with a serious face. Bufong's breathing stopped. His hand shook. A death spicy strip fell into Kersey's hand. She slurped it a few times and swallowed it. Hades Era, who was standing next to her, looked pained. How could she eat this spicy strip like this? She should savor it carefully. She swallowed it. The little girl's body suddenly changed. She grew taller and became cold. The queen's cold aura permeated the world. Hades Era was struck dumb once again. Damn it, this little girl is the legendary Queen of Curses? Lord Go gave her a surprised look. Rumble. The Queen of Curses' aura emerged. It immediately attracted the attention of the faceless man in the distance. The little girl made a move. She saved Duchess Nightmare's soul and the seriously injured Duchess Tianlian. Her cold face swept across the area in front of her. The Queen of Curses? The faceless man seemed a little puzzled. Then he raised his hand. The cage of nothingness in the distance was crushed. The 3 great soul overlords were released, and they quickly flew behind Soul. They were extremely excited. He thought he was going to die, but he was actually saved. Boom! The faceless man's great sins transformed into a single attack that swept through the heavens and earth. The Queen of Curses that the little lowly had transformed into raised her hand and launched a counterattack. Bang! Terrifying energy swept through heaven and earth. Their powers were in a constant confrontation. The people of Void City breathed a sigh of relief. The other side had the Soul God, but they also had the Queen. They would not be annihilated. However, Soon, their faces froze, because the body of the Queen of Curses, it gradually shrank and shrank. Finally, she turned into a blushing little lowly. The tide-like energy of the great sins surged down like a tidal wave, heading straight for Bu Fong and the others. I can't do it anymore. Little chef, you have a hold on. The little lowly sat on the ground and shouted, Bu Fong. Chapter 1783. Bu Fong was a little speechless. This little girl is really unreliable. Since you want to attack, just block it. What's the point of stopping halfway? The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched violently as he watched the tide-like attack come crashing down in an instant. Lord Go and Hades' era focused their eyes, and their auras erupted at the same time. The law of time and the law of life turned into two beams of light and soared into the sky, colliding with the waves of the power of the great sins. Little Lowly blinked her big eyes. What did she do? She was just a clone of the Queen of Curses' will. If it weren't for Bu Fong's death spicy strip, she would have died a long time ago. It was already very good of him to be able to save Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Tianlian. Of course, Bu Fong did not count on him. With a thought in his mind, the Black Turtle constellation walk sped in front of Bu Fong in an instant. Rumble. Lord Go's law of time and Hades' era's law of life seemed to be unable to withstand the pressure and began to retreat. Little Who opened his mouth. Energy swirled in it, and then he spat out a golden soul meatball. Boom! 3 modern-day heaven gods were fighting the soul god. Moreover, he had just woken up, and it could even be said that he was a little crippled. After a rumble, the open space in front of the palace completely crumbled. Many experts of Void City felt desperate. How could they fight? Even the Queen of Curses was knocked back by the Soul God. Void City might really be destroyed in the hands of the Soul God. A loud rumble rang out as energy poured out. Lord Go and Hades' era took a few steps back. With each step, the ground crumbled. Little Who rolled and fell into Bu Fong's arms, smoke rising from his mouth. However, although he was in a sorry state, at least the power of the great sins was blocked. Whether the faceless man was the soul god or not remained to be seen, but his cultivation base had long surpassed that of a duke. In midair, the faceless man's single arm floated in the air. Behind him, Soul wiped away her tears. The situation in Void City had changed once again. Soul's strength had once again gained the upper hand. Everyone trembled in fear. Bu Fong's expression was extremely solemn. The faceless man seemed a little surprised that his attack was blocked by Lord Go and the others. An invisible gaze swept across Lord Go and the others. He was unconcerned. Bu Fong could feel that the faceless man was looking at him. Although he didn't have a face, his powerful aura and boundless pressure made Bu Fong feel a heavy pressure on his shoulders. It was as if a huge mountain was pressing down on him. That feeling was indescribable. Suddenly, everyone's hair stood on end, and their hair stood on end. A hoarse voice rang out between the heavens and earth. Chef! Chef! Boom! These words seemed to come from a taboo, lingering between the heavens and the earth, like a sharp knife scratching a solid wall. Every slash was sharp and uncomfortable, causing one's body to go limp. Bu Fong's pupils constricted. He could feel the faceless man's attitude toward him. It was not very friendly. Bu Fong was puzzled. What did the god of cooking do in his past life? Why were these big shots' attitudes toward chefs so repulsive? It was as if they wanted to kill him. It was as if Chef had done something outrageous. Bu Fong was just a chef, the kind of chef who wanted to cook in peace. Xiao Xiaolong, Yu Fu, Niu Han San, and the others were horrified. They landed behind Bu Fong. Bu Fong glanced at them, waved his hand, and sent them into the heaven and earth farmland. He could not allow them to be involved in this storm. Roar! The faceless man seemed to be roaring. The whole Void City seemed to be on the verge of exploding, and the ground kept shaking. Behind the faceless man, the spears transformed from the power of the great sins were extremely sharp. In a flash, they were all aimed at Bu Fong. The sharp tips of the spears flickered with bright light. Whistling sounds rang out. The sharp spears shot toward Bufang. Swoosh! They were too fast. In just a flash, they approached Bufang's face, less than an inch away from Bufang's face. Boom! Behind Bufang, the door exploded. The terrible pressure made it hard for Lord Go and the others to breathe. Bufang's spirit sea had just begun to rotate. The spears of the 7 great sins were approaching him, trying to pierce through him. It was as if the god of death had arrived. In his spirit sea, the artifact spirits roared and roared. However, it was too late. A clanging sound rang out. The huge hand fell, and the spears of the 7 great sins were taken care of by Xiao Bai. Boom! The tips of the spears fell to the ground, kicking up a plume of smoke and dust. When the smoke cleared, Xiao Bai's appearance was revealed. Each of White Yi's elbows held 3 spears of great sins. The last one was stepped on by his huge foot. His purple eyes flashed in the smoke and dust, shining brightly in an instant. Boom! White Yi's figure moved. Like a whirlwind, the 7 spears were suddenly thrown out by him. Then, he threw them back toward the faceless man in midair. The great sin's spear melted in the air and floated around the faceless man's body once again. Bufang's pupils constricted, and beads of sweat rolled down his forehead. Just now, death was really close to him. If it weren't for Xiao Bai, he would have been seriously injured, if not killed. He was too weak. He had no power to fight back against this faceless man. No power to fight back? Bufang focused his eyes. That's not it. Bufang looked up at the faceless man coldly. With a thought in his mind, the chaos pot appeared in Bufang's hand in an instant. Terrible chaotic energy churned in the pot, and a golden light shone brightly, illuminating everyone's eyes. In midair, the faceless man shook his head slightly. He seemed to be sneering at Bufang's resistance. The little girl on the ground also tugged at Bufang's sleeve. However, Bufang ignored her. He had lost face, and he had to get it back. Bufang focused his eyes and took a step forward. Rumble. His aura suddenly became extremely heavy. The chaos pot's power spread. The gravel was crushed into pieces. His body rose from the ground, and the chaos pot in his hand kept spinning. All the people around sucked in their breaths. He was indeed worthy of being the chef who could push a cursed goddess, who was at the bottom, to the throne. What an earth-shattering technique. With the cultivation base of Saint of the Great Path, he could actually use such a technique. How powerful was the chaos pot? Bufang had not used it so far. In that case, he might as well give it a try. Bufang threw out his palm. His fingers pushed the sides of the chaos pot. The chaos pot began to spin in an instant. Rumble. The aura of primal chaos erupted and swept out from the chaos pot, turning it into a spinning tornado along the way. The tornado's power was too terrible. It was a vortex formed by chaotic energy. It was filled with fear that made one's heart tremble. No one could tell the faceless man's expression. Behind him, however, Soul's expression changed. Bufang's attack was not weaker than the attack of a Duke-level expert. Its power was terrible. This kind of fear made her a little anxious. After all, Bufang had just woken up, and his strength had only recovered a little. What if he was really injured by this technique? The 3 great soul overlords looked very serious. A chaos pot. Get to know it. Bufang said coldly as he stared at the chaos pot, which was flying away. The faceless man hovered in midair. He had no facial features, so he could not make any expression. However, facing Bufang's chaos pot, he slowly raised his hand. Lord Go and Hades' era were very familiar with that arm. It was the arm that Heaven God Transmigration had hidden and secretly cultivated in the chaos many years ago. And now, the arm had returned to the faceless man. In fact, no one knew whether this faceless man was the soul god or Heaven God Transmigration. However, that did not stop him from being terrifying. Rumble. He caught the chaos pot with his bare hand. Bufang's pupils constricted. Xiao Bai's purple eyes flickered. Lord Go and Hades' era also breathed sighs of relief. Rumble. A loud rumble rang out. An explosion erupted in the sky. The entire sky above Void City was swept up by the shockwave of the explosion, and heaven and earth seemed to be collapsing. Flames surged, and the chaotic energy clamored. The chaotic energy was extremely violent, and it was not the kind that a chaotic saint needed to cultivate. The nobles of Void City looked horrified. The explosion was too shocking. Even dukes would be injured if they went up against him. Rumble, the whole Void City seemed to be shaking. That was because the shock wave of the explosion had caused heaven and earth to tremble. Duchess Yunlan's pupils constricted. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Tianlian also watched in a daze. I can't believe this chef still has such a trick and trump card. If the explosion had hit them, they might not have been able to resist it. The shockwave of the explosion spread. Some soul demons were enveloped by it, and they were crushed to ashes. Bufang panted violently. Controlling the chaos pot was a great burden on his mental force. In his spirit sea, the artifact spirits were roaring. Bufang was standing in the center of the explosion. It was about time to see the result. Suddenly, Bufang's pupils constricted. His eyes were filled with disbelief. The Chaos Pot was Bufang's strongest trump card so far. Even if he was possessed by Qilin, he could not unleash such power. But in the sky, the energy of the explosion slowly spread. Hazy chaotic energy swept across the sky. Then it was the center of the explosion. Several shadows emerged. The leader was none other than the faceless man with his arm raised. Rumble. A gust of wind blew past, and the smoke and dust scattered. The faceless man was revealed. Behind him, Soul's eyes were filled with fear, but she was not injured. The same was true for the three great soul overlords. They were unscathed. Bufang's chaos pot was blocked. Bufang's strongest trump card was broken. Oh, it's not entirely ineffective. One of the fingers on the faceless man's raised arm was gone. Obviously, Bufang's blow had hurt him, but the damage was negligible. Crack, crack, in midair, the faceless man twisted his neck. Then his finger, which had been destroyed by the explosion, wriggled slowly and grew back. Rumble. The 7 spears transformed from the power of the great sins were aimed at Bufang again. Got it, got it. Now it's your turn. A hoarse, cold, sharp, and harsh voice rang through heaven and earth. The man raised his palm slightly and waved it gently. The next moment, the 7 spears of the great sins shot out once again. Xiao Bai's purple eyes flashed as he tried to block them. However, the faceless man tilted his head slightly. The power of the great sins burst out from under Xiao Bai's feet like a huge hand, binding Xiao Bai. This time, no one blocked it for Bufang. The killing intent approached in an instant. Chapter 1784. This faceless man is really too strong. Bufang's chaos pot was stronger than a duke's attack, but it had only shattered one of the faceless man's fingers. For existences of this level, physical injuries were nothing at all. He could recover in an instant. Once he recovered, he would launch a new round of attacks. A terrible aura filled the air, stirring up a clamor of energy that filled the sky. At this moment, heaven and earth seemed to have become dim and lightless. The 7 spears of great sins. The power of the great sins was the extremely pure power of sin, which surpassed the power of sin of a great soul overlord. It was extremely powerful. Bufang had experienced it firsthand, or it could be said that it belonged to the soul god. It was comparable to the pure curse power of the Queen of Curses. Boom! The 7 spears of great sins were aimed at Bufang. For a moment, the atmosphere became extremely oppressive. Bufang's pupils constricted. In a flash, Bufang's aura changed abruptly. Qilin possession. Although Qilin possession did not seem to be able to deal with the faceless man, at least Bufang would have time to react. With a ripping sound, Xiao Bai broke free from the shackles of the power of the great sins. His mechanical eyes flashed as he raised his hand. His arm turned into a cannon, from which shot purple rays. Two purple rays seemed to have turned into dragons as they sped toward the faceless man, trying to pierce him in an instant. However, even though the faceless man only had one arm, he still gracefully pointed with one finger. One of them was a spear of great sins, which flowed with the power of jealousy. There was a loud bang. The great sin spear collided with White E's ray of light. It kept suppressing Xiao Bai, forcing him to retreat. On the other side, with a shake of his remaining finger, the faceless man flicked it toward Bufang. A rumble rang out. The void continued to shatter. The 6 spears were closing in on Bufang. Bufang, possessed by Qilin possession, focused his eyes. The next moment, he let out a roar. Behind him, the shadow of a gigantic Qilin appeared. Like an awakened giant beast, a terrifying aura suddenly rushed forward. He charged towards the 6 spears of great sins. Boom! The Kirin's claws slammed into the spear of great sins, only to be pierced through in an instant. In the spirit sea, Bufang narrowed his eyes. The other artifact spirits also hovered in the air. Little host can't beat them. The divine dragon said, "Let me go. In my eyes, everything is trash." White Tiger proudly raised his head. "Come on, Boss Qilin can't hold on much longer. If you go up, you'll be killed instantly." Divine Dragon rolled his eyes at White Tiger. However, what he said was the truth. Bufang didn't say anything as he focused on the battle outside. A few spears of great sins had pushed Bufang, who was possessed by the Qilin, to the limit. Black Turtle Constellation Walk, Qilin Transmigration Ladle, White Tiger Heaven Stove. The impact of all the God of Cooking sets could barely resist the spear of great sins. In the void, the faceless man tilted his head. Looking at Bufang, who was fighting back, he seemed a little surprised. Many people were surprised as well. After all, Bufang only had the strength of a saint of the Great Path, yet he could resist for so long. It was worth noting that even dukes were killed instantly in front of this faceless man. Boom! Bufang, who was possessed by the Qilin, fell to the ground. The ground cracked, and one spear after another plunged down, turning into a prison and trapping him inside. Little Hu leaped and flew over. He opened his mouth. The soul demon meatball in his mouth shot out, heading straight for the faceless man. Lord Go and Hades Era also made their moves. Hutu and the little lowly Kersey found a place to hide. They didn't want to be a burden. Boom! The spears of great sins dissipated. They gathered around the faceless man again. The Qilin's possession disappeared. Bufang stood where he was panting. Smoke was rising from Little Hu's mouth as he lay weakly on Bufang's shoulder. Lord Go and Hades Era also flew over and fought together. The pressure was too great. The aura of the arm made Lord Go and Era tremble from the bottom of their hearts. It's over. In midair, Soul was confident of victory. In the hands of His Excellency, these people were nothing. If His Excellency attacked, everything would be destroyed. Besides, His Excellency had not even used his full strength. The 3 great soul overlords were laughing excitedly. They were sure to win. They never thought that His Excellency would wake up. Buzz, the faceless man, raised his hand. Slowly, he spread his fingers as if he was playing a beautiful zither. The 7 spears of great sins whistled through the air again. Bufang focused his eyes. Lord Go and the others also felt the pressure increase. The nobles of Void City had long fallen into despair. What should they do? Their days without the Queen of Curses were really hard. Rumble. The 7 spears of great sins sped through the air. The world seemed to have become very quiet. Bit by bit, they approached Bufang. Suddenly, a deafening rumble rang out from the Queen's palace behind Bufang. Everyone's bodies and minds shook. The door flew backward with a rumble. With a bang, it rushed toward the 7 spears of great sins. They collided with the spears and shattered in an instant. The spears did not slow down at all. A black netherworld ship that suppressed the heavens, and the earth slowly sailed over. Even the void creaked under the pressure. Rumble. The 7 spears of great sins approached. They hovered in midair. You clasped her hands behind her back and stood on the deck of the netherworld ship. Her luxurious black robe fluttered slightly under the pressure of the spears. Yu's face was indifferent as she stood in front of Bufang. The 7 spears of great sins were knocked away and flew back to the back of the faceless man. Soul's pupils constricted, and her eyes turned red in an instant. It's you. It's you. Damn it. That position should have belonged to her. Soul was extremely jealous. When the nobles of Void City saw this, they all knelt down excitedly, as if they had seen hope. Yes, they don't have the Queen of Curses, but they have you. You, who has inherited the Queen's throne, should be strong enough to stop the faceless man. Scram. Standing on a netherworld ship, you clasped her hands behind her back, her eyes dark. The ghostly green crystal between her brows seemed to emit an evil aura. Rumble. The crystal seemed to light up. Then, under the netherworld ship, a huge cursed snake roared and rushed up. This cursed snake was completely different from before. It was like a real snake, vivid and lifelike. Roaring, it rushed into the void. The faceless man raised his arm. Then, suddenly, he threw it forward. The power of sin immediately turned into a huge hand, which slapped toward the cursed snake. The instant they collided, a violent tremor ensued. The cursed snake was slapped to the ground. Smoke and dust billowed. Around Yu's netherworld ship, one cursed snake after another hissed and hissed. It seems you, who has inherited the Queen's strength, can fight this faceless man. This faceless man's strength has not reached the level of the soul god. He's about as strong as the strongest soul overlord, a perfected one. The Lord Ghost said, so strong. Bufang was slightly surprised. Not strong. In front of Soul God, I can defeat him with a slap. The Lord Ghost shook his head. The primitive universe should have existences at the level of the strongest soul overlord, but the chaotic universe doesn't have them. The corner of Bufang's mouth twitched. Is the chaotic universe so weak? However, the Lord Go was not to be blamed. If he had not been destroyed by the Soul God's arm, after countless years of accumulation, the chaotic universe might really have given birth to an existence not weaker than the strongest soul overlord. Yu's domineering words made him scram. The expressions of all the soul demons in the universe flickered. Behind the faceless man, Soul could not help but turn pale as well. How dare you? She bellowed. She could not allow anyone to be rude to his excellency. In midair, Yu glanced coldly at her. Who do you think you are? You said. As soon as her voice rang out, Soul felt a tremor run through her body. The faceless man raised his arm and kept waving it. The spear of the great sins shot out. Again and again, the spear collided with the cursed snake. Explosions rang out, causing the whole void city to tremble. From a distance, one could see that rubble kept falling from the inverted conical peak at the base of Void City. These rubble fell into the universe and began to drift in the air. Yu's domineering aura seemed to have given the experts of Void City a lot of confidence. Duchess Tianlian and Duchess Nightmare looked at Yu with complicated expressions on their faces. They did not expect that Yu, who had inherited the Queen's throne, would have some of the Queen's spirit. Duchess Tianlian's mood was the most complicated. She wanted Soul to sit on the throne to preserve Void City. She knew very well the identity of the person behind Soul. That identity made it hard for her to breathe. However, she did not expect that Soul did not care about the past at all. That was true. She was struggling in the Soul Demon universe. How could she be entangled by the past? She was possessed. Perhaps confrontation is the only way out. Soul was mad with jealousy. I should have been the one with such mighty power. Yu's strength is beyond my imagination. The Queen of Curses' throne is indeed worthy of its reputation. Rumble. The faceless man was forced to retreat. Clearly, Yu, who had obtained the cursed stone and inherited the Queen's will, had suppressed the faceless man. Bufang breathed a sigh of relief. I didn't expect that it would be you who stood up for me in the end. Looking at the familiar netherworld ship and the slender figure of a netherworld ship, Bufang was a little nostalgic for a moment. All of a sudden, a rumble echoed out. Bufang paused, and so did Lord Go, Hades era, and the others. Duchess Nightmare's expression flickered as she sensed an extremely familiar aura. This aura, she looked up at the sky. There, the sky was slowly torn apart. Rumble. A huge hand came through the rift and slapped toward you from afar. It's the strongest soul overlord. All the soul demons broke into an uproar. The three great soul overlords were extremely excited. Among the 7 great soul overlords, Sloth was the strongest. Although he was lazy, it was precisely because of his laziness that his strength had risen to the top of the soul demon universe, second only to the soul god. Then, a hand came slapping toward you. Cursed snakes soared into the sky and went straight toward the palm in the void. Rumble. Under the palm, all the cursed snakes exploded into pieces. Yu's face froze. I don't think it's appropriate for the crown prince of Void City to bully our unconscious soul god like this. A deafening voice rang through the void. The speed of this person's speech was really slow. After speaking for a long time, it was as if all his movements were very slow, and there was a warm feeling in his voice. Sloth, great soul overlord. The experts of Void City turned pale with fright. The expressions of Bufong, Lord Go, the 3 dukes, and the others also flickered. The faceless man had seized the opportunity. 7 spears came straight at you. In midair, Sloth, great soul overlord's palm came slapping down again. 2 perfected chaotic saints had struck out brazenly. Yu, on the other hand, was very calm. She raised her hand. Quietly, a flower appeared in her hand, and it slowly blossomed. A flower in the void dares to cause trouble in Void City. Are you seeking death? The flower kept spinning and blooming. Then it gradually rose into the sky and grew extremely huge in an instant, as if enveloping the whole Void City. The queen's palace became the center of the flower. Kacha! The petals bloomed to their fullest. In the depths of the palace, the towering stairway of star, slowly and smoothly, split open from middle. Chapter 1785. Rumble. The stairway of star towered into the clouds. As it cracked open, a rumbling sound rang out. A terrible aura pervaded heaven and earth. The palace was shaking violently, as if a supreme aura was about to awaken. That aura caused everyone to be extremely horrified. What was going to happen? Perhaps only Bufong, the little girl, the 3 dukes, and you knew what the crack of the stairway of star meant. It was because the Queen of Curses' body was buried in the stairway of star. Was the Queen of Curses about to appear? A look of excitement came over Kersey's pinkish face. Her thigh was about to appear. Bufong's heart tightened as well. He looked at the cracked stairway of star and saw the throne on it crumble in an instant. He was looking forward to it. Who is the Queen of Curses, the ruler of Void City and the ruler of the universe? What is so amazing about that woman who has a deep bond with the god of cooking? Everyone in the Soul Demon clan felt insecure. In midair, Sloth Great Soul Overlord also stopped moving. His terrible aura kept rumbling. There seemed to be a lazy gaze looking over from within the crack. Clearly, even someone as strong as Sloth was very curious about the Queen of Curses. The faceless man tilted his head as if he was very interested in the aura bursting out of the stairway of star. Because he sensed a familiar aura, Soul's expression changed dramatically. Although the 3 dukes did not tell her what was under the throne, she had long known what it was. That was why she wanted to sit on the throne. The Queen of Curses. Damn it. She's a lunatic. Soul could not help but tremble. The Queen of Curses was in existence on the same level as the Soul God. You stood calmly on the Netherworld ship. The pure, black curse power swirled around her. She was like a flower blooming quietly. Many people in Void City did not know what was going to happen, but they knew that it was definitely not something ordinary. Lord Go, Hades Era, and the others all opened their mouths and stared at the cracked stairway of star. Their hearts were pounding. Oh, the rumbling suddenly stopped. The next moment, the river of curses in Void City seemed to flow backward, surge up, and turn into a coiling dragon in the sky. The water continued to converge and slowly flowed into the crack, floating and sinking. They were stacked up. There was a coffin in the crack. The bronze coffin was engraved with tens of thousands of patterns. But what caused everyone's hearts to palpitate was a dish was placed on top of the coffin. Faint steam was still flowing above the dish. What the hell? Everyone was dumbfounded. This time, it was really everyone. Everyone, including Bu Fong and you, were dumbfounded. Perhaps the faceless man didn't, because he didn't have any facial features, so he couldn't pretend to be confused. Everyone else had their mouths wide open, dumbstruck. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. Fairy tales were all lies. Wasn't it said that the Queen of Curses hated food? The Queen of Curses hated chefs, so putting a dish on the Queen of Curses' coffin. What was going on? You also opened her mouth slightly. She also didn't expect this. The little girl's eyes were bright. She narrowed her eyes and twitched her nose. It seemed that in her memory, she had tasted the dish before. Lord Go and Hades' era could not help but roll their eyes. Sure enough, the Queen of Curses was also a foodie. She was a foodie who was harmed by chefs, you inheriting the throne. Come to think of it, it was no accident. Soul's defeat was not unjust. If one were to blame, she could only blame herself for not having a chef behind her. With a thought, Bu Fong tried to perceive the dish. It was a very ordinary dish. It did not emit any gorgeous light or towering spiritual energy. It was so calm that it looked like a home-cooked dish. However, this dish was like the most beautiful light in the universe, attracting everyone's attention. Even Bu Fong's heart was filled with a strong desire. What dish was that? Bu Fong was shocked. He could not believe that he was attracted by this dish. Was it a dish cooked by the god of cooking? His spirit could not get close to the coffin, as if there was a layer of membrane that prevented him from getting close. Lord Go licked his paws. Lord Go, I can't help but miss Bu Fong's sweet and sour ribs. With a spicy strip in his mouth, Hades' era's eyes were also blurred. Give me a ton of spicy strips. I can eat until the end of time. The little girl narrowed her eyes, leaned forward, and twitched her little nose. Oh, Little Hu's eyes were bright. Saliva dripped from his little mouth, and he wagged his tail. Xiaopi lay on Bu Fong's shoulder and calmly blew a bubble. The appearance of a coffin attracted the attention of the whole city. Everyone was in an uproar. What was the coffin in the Queen's palace? Was it the Queen of Curses? No one knew. In midair, Sloth Great Soul Overlord took a deep breath and withdrew his hand. Many soul demons held their breaths, not daring to breathe too loudly. If it was really the Queen of Curses, none of them would be able to escape once she made a move. Yu was calm and composed. She seemed to have become the focus of the petals. With the appearance of the coffin, the faceless man stopped attacking. The faceless man took a step forward. Nethery furrowed her brows. Buzz, you raise her hand. Her slender hand seemed to grab the void. Then, she clenched it gently. The petals of nothingness spread. The soul demons cried for help in horror. The power of nothingness entangled their bodies, almost suffocating them. The pure curse power kept stimulating the soul demon's skin and making their hearts clench. Soul was dumbfounded. She, too, was entangled. Life and death seemed to be far away from her. As long as you willed it, her body would be torn to pieces, turned into nothingness, and scattered in the void. She didn't want to die. She wanted to stay with His Excellency. Your Excellency, help me. Soul's eyes were filled with horror as she cried for help from the faceless man in front of her. She had never cried for help before, and she would only do so in front of Her Excellency. It was a kind of dependence, a kind of trust. In the past, He had also brought her hope and saved her when she cried for help. But this time, she was in despair. The faceless man did not look back. He was still walking in midair, walking step by step toward the coffin hovering in the distance. There seemed to be a mysterious aura attracting him. You frowned. Stop. However, the faceless man did not seem to hear her. You put more force in her palm. All the soul demons howled in horror. They found that their minds were crumbling and their bodies were crumbling. The power of the curse seemed to want to melt their bodies. It was the same for the three great soul overlords. Perhaps only Sloth Great Soul Overlord, who was hovering in midair, was not affected. I know. The little girl, whose nose was twitching, suddenly came to her senses, and her eyes lit up. This is the starry sky array created by the Queen of Curses, a flower in the void. She said. She had some of the Queen's will and vague memories. Bufong paused. The Queen is using her own coffin as the eye of the array, but he had to admit that the name of the Queen's array is really unpleasant. You furrowed her brows. She looked at the faceless man, who kept walking forward. He was getting closer and closer to the coffin. There was a mighty force around the coffin, trying to push him away. The power of nothingness wrapped around his body, but it was constantly torn away by the faceless man's single arm. Finally, the faceless man approached the coffin. He seemed to be staring at the dish placed on the coffin and roared. His voice was shrill and angry. Yu's expression flickered. Stepping on the netherworld ship, she sped in front of the faceless man. Rumble. The power of the great sins turned into a huge hand and slapped toward you. Even Yu's cursed snake rushed up and collided with it. Rumble. The whole Void City was shaking. Everyone's hearts trembled with fear. Nethery, can you do it? Hades Era said with a spicy strip dangling from his mouth. Why don't you do it? Lord Ghost said, glancing at Hades Era. Hades Era smiled sheepishly and quickly stopped talking. Although he was heaven god life, he could not withstand the faceless man's spear. The faceless man reached out a hand and grabbed the dish placed on the coffin. The dish was steaming hot, and the faint steam was like a small snake surging on it. As the faceless man approached, Yu's pupils constricted. Slash! In midair, many soul demons were strangled and killed by the power of the curse. Soul's face was ashen, and she coughed up blood. The same was true for the three great soul overlords. Before long, they might really die in the void. The faceless man did not look back. He did not care about the lives of the soul demons and soul. He reached out a hand and was about to approach the coffin. Finally, he got close to the dish. His fingertips kept coming closer. 1 inch, 1 inch, rumble. Suddenly, the coffin trembled. Slowly, it opened a crack. At this moment, heaven and earth seemed to explode with a deafening sound. Rumble. A terrible pressure that could suppress heaven and earth exploded out of the coffin. Bam! In Void City, countless nobles knelt on the ground. The bodies of countless soul demons who were entangled burst into pieces. The three great soul overlords howled miserably. There was only despair in Soul's eyes as she stared at the faceless man's back. In midair, the crack opened. Sloth Great Soul Overlord struck. With the strength of a perfected Great Soul Overlord, he was able to resist the mighty power in the coffin. He grabbed the three great soul overlords and took them away. Soul's shackles were torn apart and taken away. Blood trickled down the faceless man's faceless face. Even his blood seemed to be squirming. His outstretched arm kept melting and melting. Rumble. The coffin opened a little more. Bam! The faceless man was knocked flying away, and his whole body was covered in blood. Bufong felt that the pressure on his body was extremely heavy, so heavy that he almost couldn't breathe. Suddenly, a warm current flowed through Bufong's mind. Bufong paused. It was the system's power, and Bufong was very familiar with it. The pressure disappeared. Bufong felt his body lighten. Looking at the faceless man approaching him again, he hesitated for a moment. In midair, blood was trickling down the corner of Yu's mouth. Obviously, supporting this grand formation was a huge burden for her now. Looking at the faceless man who was approaching her once again, Nethery's pitch-black eyes seemed to be burning with flames. The cursed snakes around the netherworld ship were roaring. The faceless man walked forward step by step. His whole body was covered in blood, which wriggled like little worms. Finally, the faceless man, who had been knocked flying away, approached again. He reached out his hand to grab the dish closer, closer again. The coffin did not open again. It seemed that opening it to this extent was already the limit. Everyone could feel the faceless man's desire. This desire made their hearts palpitate. It was as if once the faceless man got the dish, everyone would be in a disaster. What should they do? They were very anxious. The dish gave off steam, but there was nothing magical about it. The most magical thing was that it was placed on the coffin. The fingers on the faceless man's single arm trembled slightly, and beads of blood dripped from his fingertips. The moment it fell, it was blown away by a huge force and shot backwards. Finally, he was about to grab the dish. His fingertips were just a hair's breadth away from grabbing it. There seemed to be only a small gap between heaven and earth. Suddenly, sorry, let me take a look at the dish first. All of a sudden, an indifferent voice resounded. The faceless man raised his head. No one knew when, but a thin and slender figure had appeared beside the coffin. Her fair hand descended and gently landed on the dish, directly pulling it open. The faceless man's fingertips almost touched the dish, but he could only watch as the dish moved further and further away from his fingertips. F***CKU. The faceless man almost roared out loud. The whole world was silent. It was extremely strange. Chapter 1786. If he could curse someone, the faceless man would definitely curse Bu Fong 1,000 times. This is crazy. The faceless man couldn't stand this kind of grievance. His fingers were almost touching the dish when Bu Fong suddenly appeared and took the dish away. Is it fun? Can you maintain the trust between people? Boom! The faceless man, who was approaching under great pressure, felt as if the blood in his body was flowing in reverse. With a poochy sound, he was sent flying and crashed into the ground in the distance. Bu Fong was slightly taken aback as he held the dish. He glanced at the faceless man who flew backward and smacked his lips. I'm just taking a look. I'll return it to you when I'm done. Why are you so impatient? Bu Fong shook his head. His eyes fell on the dish in his hand. From a distance, he couldn't see what the dish on the coffin was. But Bu Fong could see it clearly from a close distance. This dish was a simple plate of egg fried rice. Egg fried rice. Bu Fong was stunned. Did the Queen of Curses like egg fried rice? Otherwise, why would there be such a plate of egg fried rice on her coffin? It was a very ordinary dish. There was no soaring spiritual energy or gorgeous brilliance. It was as if the rice used was ordinary rice, and the eggs used were also ordinary eggs. When Bu Fong was in the Light Wind Empire, the egg fried rice he cooked was even more flashy than this. It was as if it had returned to its original state. Bu Fong frowned slightly. The egg fried rice that could be placed on the Queen of Curses coffin was definitely not ordinary. Bu Fong knew it very well. He narrowed his eyes and glanced at it. His heart skipped a beat. A blue and white porcelain spoon appeared in his hand, and he was about to scoop a spoonful of rice to eat. The people around were stunned. When did Bu Fong appear there? Why didn't they know? Why did he appear there? Didn't he feel the terrible pressure in the world? In the distance, the faceless man who crawled out of the ruins seemed to be roaring. The blood on his body dried up and fell off. Lord Go and Hades' era couldn't help but smile. If a dish appeared in front of Bu Fong, it must be Bu Fong's dish. She felt sorry for the faceless man. In the next second, the food that was in her hands was forcefully snatched away. You smiled faintly at Bu Fong as she stood on the Netherworld ship. She supported the formation, and within the formation, all kinds of energy flowed. The coffin seemed to have become the center of the world. Bu Fong was very calm. Egg fried rice. He had eaten at least 9,000 bowls, if not 10,000. He wanted to see what was so special about this bowl of egg fried rice placed on the coffin. However, just as he was about to take the next spoonful, Bu Fong's heart skipped a beat as he felt a pair of eyes staring at him. His gaze shifted and landed on the small opening of the coffin. There seemed to be a line of sight sweeping out from the small black hole. Expressionlessly, Bu Fong placed the egg-fried rice back on the coffin. I was just smelling it, Bu Fong said. In the distance, there was a roar. There was a loud bang. That faceless man let out a soundless roar. That arm of his slapped out. Countless great sins gathered and turned into a palm, slapping toward the coffin. Yu's face was cold as she supported the formation. Boom! The faceless man's palm landed on the formation, causing it to shake violently. Yu's body trembled. However, the formation was not broken. The faceless man's move had shaken the formation. However, the faceless man seemed to have lost his mind. He kept attacking the formation, causing it to shake. It was like using a sledgehammer to hit a tortoise's shell. This time, everyone could clearly feel that the faceless man's target was no longer that dish, was Bufong. Obviously, Bufong had successfully attracted hatred. Nethery furrowed her brows. With a flip of her hand, terrible power of void rose into the sky and turned into a mandala flower, twisting and spinning. The coffin opened again. A terrible pressure and aura descended upon heaven and earth. Bufong put the egg-fried rice back, and only then did he feel the sharp gaze disappear. In the sky, Sloth Great Soul Overlord had struck. He followed the faceless man's will. A palm fell from the sky. It smashed into the array you was supporting. Rumble. The whole Void City shook violently, as if it was about to collapse. Countless fine cracks spread across the ground of Void City. The Faceless Man and Sloth Great Soul Overlord, two perfected chaotic saints, had put a lot of pressure on you. In fact, she could hardly hold on. The Faceless Man was extremely irritable. He kept throwing out palm after palm, even though his palms were already bloody. You flew up and landed beside the coffin, panting slightly as she looked at Bufong. Bufong's pupils constricted. Bufong, I'm hungry. You turned to look at Bufong. Bufong paused, then nodded. With a thought, the black turtle constellation walk, the dragon bone kitchen knife, and the other god of cooking sets appeared, and he began to cook in midair. Flames rose into the sky. Bufong cooked in an orderly manner. Before long, a golden light soared into the sky. Blood energy spread. A bowl of dragon blood rice, Yu's favorite, was ready. You took the rice, sat cross-legged on the Netherworld ship, and began to gorge yourself. Outside the array, Sloth Great Soul Overlord and the Faceless Man kept attacking. The experts of Void City looked at each other in dismay. Many of them felt inexplicably sad. They felt that you might not be able to hold on any longer. However, who was eating calmly still made many people feel strange. Nethery ate quickly, and soon a bowl of rice was gone. You looked much more energetic. Remember this taste, you said. Her voice faded away. You looked at Bufong, raised her hand, and attacked him with the power of the curse. In an instant, Bufong felt a tremendous impact on his body. His body flew backward and landed in front of the palace. You rose to her feet once again and stood at the prow of the Netherworld ship. Her black robe fluttered nobly in the wind. Her black hair, which was tied up in a bun, was removed from her crown. Then, her hair cascaded down her head like a waterfall, waving in the wind. Strands of hair brushed past her face, causing her cold and delicate features to become even colder. Rumble. The stairway of star cracked on both sides. The next moment, a throne floated in the air. You left the Netherworld ship and sat on the throne. The moment she sat on the throne, it was as if a terrifying will had been awakened. The sky changed colors, and the wind and clouds surged. The stars fell. Rumble. At the crack of the stairway of star, a huge white arm thrust out of it. The arm was as gentle as jade. The moment it thrust out, it went straight toward the palm of the Faceless Man and Sloth Great Soul Overlord. In midair, Sloth's expression flickered. He jerked his arm back, but it was still too slow. The moment they collided, his arm exploded. The Faceless Man's arm cracked as well, and he took a few steps back. The Queen of Curses, Sloth Great Soul Overlord, who was hiding in the rift, cried out in bewilderment. The next moment, he grabbed the three Great Soul Overlords' true forms and soul's body and plunged into the rift in the void. As for the rest of the Soul Demon Army, they were all blown to pieces by the jade-white palm. Countless curses wrapped around the true forms of the Soul Demons, causing them to melt in midair. The huge army of Soul Demons was gone. Now, the Faceless Man was the only one left. His arms drooped, and his featureless face seemed to be staring at you, who sat on the throne. You sat on the throne with her head bowed. She stood high and mighty like the king of the 9 heavens. The faceless man stared at her for a long time. Finally, he turned his head and looked at Bufong, who was standing on the roof of the palace. The invisible gaze, which was filled with deep hatred, made the corner of Bufong's mouth twitch. All I did was steal your dish. Is there need to hate me so much? Rumble. The faceless man left. In the blink of an eye, he disappeared. Wait for my return. The chef must die. His hoarse, sharp voice shook the whole Void City. It made everyone's eardrums feel extremely uncomfortable. However, as soon as his voice faded away, the faceless man turned, broke through the void, and left. The great pressure disappeared in an instant. In midair, you, sitting on the throne with her head bowed, was indifferent. There seemed to be nothing she could do about the faceless man's departure. The stairway of star began to heal. The coffin slowly fell to the ground. The dish on the coffin was still giving off steam. As for Bufong, he did not know if it was an illusion, but he felt that the eyes in the coffin were still staring at him, warning him. It's just a bowl of egg-fried rice. Bufong was speechless. Rumble. The stairway of star began to heal. The coffin fell. However, what caused everyone to be extremely shocked was that you, sitting on the throne, also fell into the healing stairway of star. All the people in Void City were horrified. They watched helplessly as you fell into the stairway of star. Bufong, Lord Go, and Hades' Era were taken aback. Their figures flickered, and they appeared on the stairway of star. However, you was nowhere to be seen. The stairway of star was very stable. The throne was gone, and so was you. All that was left was the netherworld ship hovering in midair, emitting a powerful aura. Where's Nethery? Hades' Era was startled. Is she buried with him? Lord Go and Bufong both frowned, not quite understanding. With a shake of his hand, Bufong produced the dragon bone kitchen knife. A dragon roar shook the sky, and the knife slashed at the stairway of star. However, it did not make a dent. This stairway of star is the place where the queen is buried. It can't be broken with brute force. You can't break it with brute force, Lord Go said. He patted it with his paw and could feel the terrible power contained in it. The 3 of them flew away from the stairway of star. You are the heir of Void City, so the Queen of Curses should not do anything to you. Don't worry. Once you enter the stairway of star, you will inherit the Queen's legacy, the little lowly Cursey said excitedly. No one knew better than her the benefits you could get by entering the stairway of star. That kind of benefit made her jealous and envious. As the clone of the Queen's will, she did not get such treatment. The ground of Void City was littered with the corpses of soul demons and the experts of Void City. The battle had finally come to an end. The experts of the land of exile were taken back to District D. The battle was over. However, although it was over, everyone's hearts were still shrouded in gloom, because the battle had come to an end, but the true danger was quietly approaching. Boom! Void City trembled, and the sound of an explosion rang out. Everyone's pupils constricted, and their expressions changed dramatically. It was as if an earthquake had struck Void City. If one looked from afar, one could clearly see, beneath Void City, in front of the inverted cone-shaped mountain, the faceless man hovered there. He raised his arm. The 7 spears of the great sins shot out and plunged into the inverted cone-shaped mountain. Boom! The entire mountain crumbled and crumbled. Countless rubble fell from the sky. A powerful suction exploded out of it. The rubble fell into the void and fell into the void. The lower part of Void City was blown in half. Then, in the center of the broken mountain, half of the man's body emerged. It was shrouded in the power of the great sins, which emitted a suffocating aura that could suppress the universe. Numerous cold chains made of the power of curses were wrapped around it. The 7 spears of the great sins smashed into it. As a result, the chains were broken. The wrapped half of the man's body, with a rumble, he sped away. In midair, carrying half of his body, the faceless man tore open the void and returned to the soul demon universe. Chapter 1787. The little girl came over with a spicy strip in her hand. Bufong still visited the heaven and earth farmland. Since the queen had to put a dish on her coffin, what reason did they have not to eat delicious food? What happened? Duchess Tianlian's voice was a little hurried and sad. At that time, Void City was considered a neutral power, not involved in the wars of the universe. The current immortal tree was no longer ordinary. Spiraling around it were streams of primal chaos aura. However, she was, after all, a chaotic saint. Given some time, she would be able to reform her fleshly body. Hades' era, on the other hand, had gone to Void City to roam. If Soul God returns, Void City will surely be destroyed. Hearing that, Bufong did not want to waste time talking. He got up and went straight to the kitchen. Kersey, entertain them. Bufong's faint voice drifted out of the kitchen. The system's products were indeed exquisite. In their respective territories, there was the loneliness of looking down on all the other mountains. After eating, they left in a hurry. The little girl was unruffled. With a lovely smile on her little face, she nodded at the nobles of Void City in the distance. Little who had been doing well recently. She was heaven god destruction, and Bufong was not stingy with food when it came to her. In the past, Bufong had made his fortune by eating stinky tofu. Putting aside the ethereal god of cooking God Little Restaurant was amazing. They were no longer lonely. He had no right to be proud and indulgent. Duchess Tianlian froze. Just as well, why? In the heaven and earth farmland, Bufong was very pleased. After that battle, the apprentice's spirit, energy, and spirit had changed a lot. Between the dignity of the queen and the death spicy strip, she did not hesitate to choose the death spicy strip. The little girl's eyes widened as she stared incredulously at Bufong, who had just entered the kitchen. After preparing for the dark cuisine, he began to practice his cooking skills. Chefs were the cutest creatures in the world. Although he had reached his current level, Bufong did not neglect his cooking training. We need to eat something to calm down. Marquis Langu pointed at Bufong from afar. However, they were all resolved by him, and he did not even use the senseless lotus. This naturally attracted their attention. Everyone's faces were filled with fear. He entered Nyo Hansen's wooden hut. Kersey had completely immersed herself in the role of a waitress. The temptation of 3 death spicy strips made Kersey unable to resist at all. As usual, Xiaopi spat bubbles again. If the enemy didn't move, it wouldn't move either. These selfish and greedy nobles of Void City needed to be reorganized. I'm the avatar of the Queen of Curse's will. And you want me to be a waiter? He walked out of the Cursed Queen's palace. Duchess Nightmare was now only left with her soul body and was extremely weak. The customers who were queuing outside also swarmed in. It was just that, after eating it, she almost exploded. This woman, did she cultivate so much that her brain broke? Perhaps all the soul demons around Void City had been wiped out by the experts of the Void Universe. Many people boldly speculated that the faceless man, who was very likely to be Soul God, had actually attacked that half of the body. So it was very likely that it was Soul God's lower body. Hutu appeared, and her face was extremely unsightly. Bufong returned to the god of cooking little store with Lord Go, Era, and Kersey. This was not good news for everyone. Many people also entered in a single file. It was just like how the chaotic universe had suppressed Soul God's arm. Duchess Nightmare and Duchess Yunlan sighed at the same time. Many people were dumbfounded. Void City was considered a neutral power. Half of a body flew out of the broken base, emanating a terrible aura that almost destroyed Void City. It was so terrifying that it was fatal. This was impossible, not in this lifetime. What the hell? The god of cooking little store seemed to have calmed down. Hades' era, who was slumped in his chair like a salted fish, widened his eyes in displeasure. This was far from enough. There was not much movement. Are you stupid? Forget it. Soul God is slowly returning. The end of Void City is coming. I want Soul to sit on the throne. That way, she may be able to protect Void City. Suddenly, Viscount Ash and the others left contentedly. Once, Bufong even took her to the broken universe. The petals of the pure, white, senseless lotus swayed gently in the wind. He gave her the chaos pot. Let her be a waitress? The bodies of the dead soul demons were disposed of. The lower half of the body was definitely not ordinary. After that, the two of them left to clean up the mess. What are you doing? The woman placed a bowl of egg-fried rice on her coffin. It looked like she was going to sleep. Soul God and Void City had long formed a grudge that could not be resolved. He was like a fish in water. The war between the primitive universe and the soul demon universe continued. The faceless man began to retract his body. When a saint of the Great Path fought Soul God, the latter could kill him with a puff of air. After a long time, he caused Little Who to suffer from constipation for 3 days. They toasted each other. He naturally thought of the same thing as the others. As for you, who inherited the Queen's legacy on the Chaos Tree, the recovery and construction of Void City was very fast. It's hopeless. You don't know who is standing behind Soul. Bufong looked at Duchess Tianlian, somewhat speechless. Bufong was alarmed. It probably meant that Soul God was going to wake up. Bufong glanced at her indifferently. A new day of business had begun. Bufong's faint voice drifted out. As for the chaotic universe, the arm of the chaotic universe was sent back to the soul demon universe by heaven god transmigration, causing the faceless man to appear. So far, no one had survived Bufong's dark cuisine. However, the possibility was very small. They even thought of the consequences of Soul God's return. The challenge of the dark cuisine was still there. Everyone in Void City thought of this, and their faces were very pale and unsightly. Kersey was dumbfounded. It was not enough. They learned of the higher realms and stronger enemies. As for the corpses of the nobles, the 3 dukes held funerals and let their bodies drift in the starry sky. The foundation of Void City exploded. Bufong returned to the restaurant, slumped in a chair, and took a break, panting. In Void City, the soul demon universe was very strong and terrifying. It was guarded by Soul God and the strongest soul overlord among the perfected chaotic saints. The corner of Bufong's mouth twitched. Duchess Tianlian shook her head. Bufong stepped into the kitchen. His faint voice drifted through the air. Bufong paused. There were many noble women in Void City. She could only lick the bowl of rice soup that Bufong had prepared for her. The little lowly was furious in her heart. They needed to clean up the mess Soul had left behind. Compared to when they were in the Light Wind Empire, the difference was like the clouds and mud. She looked at Bufong with the most complicated look in her eyes. Lord Go ate the sweet and sour ribs with relish. His body, which was thin because he had become heaven god of time, was growing plump. The 3 dukes had complicated expressions on their faces. There seemed to be an elegant fragrance wafting out of it. Bufong returned to the restaurant, but now it was not used. Ever since they learned that there was a bowl of egg-fried rice on the Queen's coffin, they no longer restricted their appetite. Whether the Queen of Curses of Void City was still alive or not had become a mystery. Get out of here. Bufong spent the next few days cooking leisurely. If the Queen learned about this, she would probably open the lid of her coffin and poke Kersey to death with a finger. Duchess Tianlian paused. Duchess Yunlan and Duchess Nightmare shook their heads. It's hard to say. Who knows when you will break the stairway of star and come out? Huda would occasionally come back to the restaurant for a meal. I, Kersey, am determined to be a waitress. Her dedication to cooking and her efforts in cultivation base are much more enthusiastic than before. The god of cooking little restaurant was becoming more and more popular in Void City. More and more people came to line up in front of it every day. It's ready. 3 death spicy strips a day. Unless the Queen of Curses or the god of cooking showed up. Bufong paused. This was not good news. Bufong, young man, do you still need waitresses? I am light and flexible. I'm very suitable for the job of waitress. The senseless lotus was quietly blooming. Outside the restaurant, the soul god was returning step by step, gathering his fleshly body. However, Bufang said, after such a great battle and being bombarded by the army of soul demons, he was unscathed. The heaven tree towered into the clouds. Duchess Telian's injuries were almost healed. The winner would also get a dish containing chaotic energy. Bufang opened the door of the restaurant. Now, Void City was on the opposite side of the soul demon universe. In terms of the study of dark cuisine, if Bufang claimed to be the second best, no one would claim to be the best. The soul god is standing behind her. I can sense soul god's will in her. It's the true awakened will of the soul god. However, after going through a battle, Bufang stared blankly at the senseless lotus. Soul is a person who values relationships. I can feel it. If I seal your lower body in the inverted mountain under Void City for countless years, will you still smile at me? He was looking for an opportunity to break through. They had all come to the restaurant. It would be best if they never had to use it again. They would work hard to cook and cultivate. The various great cosmoses would banish their exiled people to the Void Cosmos. Their lower bodies were suppressed by Void City. The Void Universe was no match for them. Using the whole Void City to suppress them naturally showed how terrifying they were. He knew that his cooking skills had reached the pinnacle in the universe. In the past, because of Bufang, it was too easy for them to improve their cultivation bases. In fact, Bufang had encountered many disasters since he started cultivating. The cultivation base of a Saint of the Great Path was unparalleled. After the soul demons returned, Hades' Era's eyes lit up as he shouted in the direction of the kitchen. The breeze was warm. He was afraid that he could not count on it. At dawn, after eating and drinking, Bufang stood with his hands clasped behind his back, his face grave. 3 death spicy strips? He had not even touched the surface of the god of cooking's realm. Once they succeeded, they might not be able to fight against the soul god. However, perhaps the heaven tree today could no longer be called the heaven tree. It should be called the tree of chaos instead. She could not defeat a few heaven gods who had just returned. All kinds of delicacies were stuffed into her mouth. All kinds of crackling sounds rang out in the wooden hut, causing the peaceful creatures in the farmland to be extremely shocked. She was a person of status. Mu Hongzi had said that the senseless lotus could save him once and ward off a calamity for him. It was a wonderful time to eat and drink. Bufang took a deep breath. Although I don't know what happened back then, I'm sure the relationship between Void City and the Soul God is not very good. During those 3 days, Little Who was listless and could not eat meatballs. Lord Go and Hades' Era stayed in the restaurant as well. In the past, his cultivation base was far from the point where he could be arrogant and indulgent. Bufang's words woke her up. That's right. If that's true, it's really terrible. This way, please. Tell me what you want to eat. I'll take note of your requests. Judging from you inheriting the throne, Void City will side with the chaotic universe and the primitive universe. Put to Marquis Langu, Countess Yachio, Viscount Ash, and the others. Chapter 1788. Huda's face was unsightly. She went to the restaurant and ordered a jar of wine. Yes, she only ordered a jar of wine and sat in the restaurant, drinking by herself. Her face was full of melancholy. The restaurant was bustling with activity, while the dark cuisine outside was led by Marquis Langu. Every night, Bufang would prepare the dark cuisine for the next day and give it to Marquis Langu to prepare for the next day's challenge. Whoever succeeded in the challenge would get the food from the restaurant that contained chaotic energy. Unfortunately, so far, no one had succeeded. Bufang wiped the water off his hands and walked out of the restaurant. When Hutu saw Bufang, she waved at him. Bufang pulled out a chair and sat opposite her. What's wrong? Bufang looked at Hutu, puzzled. Bufang had a good attitude toward this cursed goddess from the primitive universe. Strictly speaking, Hutu and Bufang were from the same hometown. Earth should also be considered the ancestral planet of the primitive universe. You should know about the war between the primitive universe and the soul demon universe, right? Hutu said. Bufang nodded. Back then, Hutu and Seoul competed for the position of heir to Void City to determine the outcome of the war. The situation is not good, Hutu said, frowning and looking very serious. The revival of the Soul God has a great impact on the morale of the Soul Demon universe. The stalemate has now begun to collapse, Hutu said. Bufong paused. There are so many almighty experts in the primitive universe. Can't they defeat the Soul Demons? Bufong did not know much about the primitive universe. However, he knew that there were many saints of the Great Path and chaotic saints in the primitive universe. The situation in the primitive universe is somewhat complicated. Many almighty experts are asleep. Hutu sighed. Soul God and the Queen of Curses are not the only ones who have fallen into a deep slumber. Many of the big shots are actually in a long slumber, so they will not have much of an impact on the battle. But now that Soul God has awakened, the situation of the battle will definitely change. I thought that after inheriting the throne of Void City, I could use its power to defeat the Soul Demon universe. Now, it seems that I was a little presumptuous. Hutu took a sip of wine and frowned. Bufong was silent. He really didn't know these secrets. Moreover, you should have expected it. Hutu looked at Bufong. Bufong was stunned. What did he expect? You have to make it clear. The Chaos Verse is suppressing an arm. Void City suppresses the lower half of the body. The upper half of the body is in the Soul Demon universe. We're the head and arms. Hutu said. As soon as he said that, Bufong's expression changed slightly. Hutu's meaning was obvious. Soul God's current goal was the remaining head and arm, or rather, they were the goal of the Soul Demon universe. Once they were gathered, they could summon Soul God. The reason the faceless man had appeared was that Heaven God Transmigration had brought Soul God's arm to the Soul Demon universe. Otherwise, would the strongest soul overlord in Void City have crossed universes to save him? At the thought of that, Bufong felt a headache coming on. Yes, according to my guess, Soul God's head and arm should be suppressed in the primitive universe, Hutu sighed. She looked very serious. Bufong pondered, poured himself a glass of wine, and took a sip. The news was a little shocking, and he needed a drink to calm himself down. I'll return to the primitive universe first. Your cooking skills have a strong suppressive effect on soul demons. I hope you can come to the primitive universe to help, Hutu said. Of course, I won't force you. It's fine if you don't want to come. However, if the primitive universe falls and Soul God body is gathered, you won't be able to escape. Soul God's determination to kill you is too strong. Hutu stood up, paid the bill, and left. Her face was very serious. After all, the situation was urgent. Bufong sat in his seat and did not move. Hutu rose to her feet and left the restaurant. Duchess Nightmare's figure flashed out of the door. There was no doubt that she had followed Hutu to the primitive universe. The absence of a duke in Void City would certainly have an impact on its overall strength. However, Void City was temporarily safe now. After all, Soul God's lower body had been taken away. Therefore, there was no harm in going to the primitive universe to support it. Bufong thought for a long time, then got up and went back to the restaurant to continue cooking and operating. Soon, the sky was getting dark, and Bufong closed the restaurant. He no longer needed business points to break through his cultivation base. He had to find an opportunity to cook dishes approved by the system before he could level up. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that Bufong's breakthrough was still far away. After all, the system was now asking Bufong for help according to the god of cooking's request. Under the Path Understanding tree, Lord Go was eating sweet and sour ribs. His face was covered with juice, but he did not care at all. Instead, he was licking the bowl happily. You want to go to the primitive universe? Lord Go asked Bufong, raising his eyelids. Bufong neither nodded nor shook his head. Hades' era held a spicy strip between his lips. To tell you the truth, the primitive universe is not a good place. Soul God's current goal is the primitive universe. Aren't you courting death by going there? You know it's dangerous, but you still want to go? But if Soul God gathers all his fleshly bodies, it's useless to hide anywhere. Bufong said, at Soul God's level, He could cross many universes with a thought. There was nowhere to hide. I'll die if I go, and I'll die if I don't. It's really hard to choose. Hades' Era ran his fingers through his hair and pushed his bangs back. Suddenly, Era's eyes rolled. He beckoned to Little Hu and Xiaopi. The two little fellows were confused. At the dining table, Little Hu lay on the left, while Xiaopi lay on the right. Little Hu blinked his big eyes, looking confused. Xiaopi calmly blew bubbles. Then, Hades' Era put a spicy strip between the two little fellows. Well, I'll let heaven decide whether to go to the primitive universe. If the spicy strip leans toward Little Hu, I won't go. If it leans toward Xiaopi, I'll go to the primitive universe and be mischievous. What do you think? Era's face flickered. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. So casual? Lord Go yawned and motioned for them to have fun. Then, he lay under the path understanding tree and fell asleep. Obviously, he was not interested in such a boring thing. Okay, Bu Fong thought for a moment. Since he could not make a decision, he decided to follow Era's idiotic method. The corners of Era's mouth curled up, revealing a mouthful of shiny teeth. The little lowly Kersey watched from afar. Xiao AI used to follow you, but now that you have inherited the throne and have your own palace, Xiao AI is in charge of managing the palace. Kersey sneered at their childish behavior. How old are they? Why are they still playing such childish tricks? Era pinched the spicy strip by the top, making it stand in the middle of the table. Little Hu wagged his tail, and Xiaopi's bubbles burst. It has begun, the moment that will decide our fate, Erha said, his voice exuding a deep sense of suspense. Then, he loosened his grip. Everyone in the restaurant shuddered, and their breaths stagnated. Bu Fong, Era, Lord Go, and Kersey, who said they were not interested, they craned their necks and stared at the spicy strip. The spicy strip wobbled. In the end, everyone's breathing was tense. It did not move. It stood straight, like a pillar supporting the sky. Hades' Era's face froze. What the hell is this spicy strip? Is it trying to attract attention? Fall. Why don't you fall? Suddenly, Shrimpy spat out a bubble from its mouth, and the bubble expanded to its limit. Then poof. It burst. A gust of air blew past. The trembling spicy strip fell to the ground. With a plop, it pointed at Xiaopi. It fell in front of Xiaopi. Shrimpy's compound eyes rolled around for a moment. Then, it opened its mouth and bit the chilly strip. F***CK? How dare you eat it secretly? Let go of I's spicy strip. Era's face darkened. The spicy strip fell toward Xiaopi. Bu Fong arched an eyebrow. Does this mean I'm going to the primitive universe to be mischievous? It seems that the meaning is very obvious. Hades' Era grabbed the spicy strip and shook it up and down. Xiaopi bit the spicy strip and did not let go. No matter how hard he shook it, it did not move. This mantis shrimp is really mischievous, Bu Fong thought to himself. Kersey grinned. She was laughing at Era for being a fool. Suddenly, she saw the thoughtful look on Bu Fong's face, and she paused. You're not really going to the primitive universe, are you? Are you courting death? If Soul God fuses with the lower body he obtained from Void City, he will definitely be stronger than the faceless man. You will only be courting death if you go there. This time, the Queen of Curses array won't protect you. Kersey said. Bu Fong also knew this. Go, lying under the path understanding tree. Lord Go yawned. But, before I go, can you prepare all the sweet and sour ribs for the next 100 years for me? Lord Go? Bu Fong rolled his eyes. Lord Go, Era and I can't go with you, and neither can Little Hu. We have to return to the chaotic universe. If the soul demons attack the chaotic universe, it will fall without us. Lord Go rose to his feet and came up to Bu Fong with his elegant cat-like steps. He raised his paw and patted Bu Fong's thigh. Take care, Bu Fong boy. You should know about Lord Go's proposal. The corner of Bu Fong's mouth twitched. This guy is really not optimistic about me at all. But it was true that he was just a saint of the Great Path. Even the strongest soul overlord could kill him, let alone the soul god. Now, Lord Go and Era could not save him like before. He could only rely on himself now. Fortunately, he had Xiao Bai. He had Xiao Bai. I can't go either. I have to stay in Void City and protect Nethery. I have to stay in Void City and protect you. She was the clone of the Queen's will. At critical moments, she could transform into the Queen and resolve crises. So, she had to stay. Bufang nodded. He had made up his mind. This trip to the primitive universe. He would only take Xiao Bai and Xiaopi with him. Perhaps this trip to the untainted land would really be a disaster. But he felt he had to go. It was not only because of his relationship with the primitive universe. It was also because he needed to seek a breakthrough in his cultivation base. And there was an inexplicable voice in his heart telling him to go to the primitive universe. Perhaps there would be some gains there? Even if he was in the primitive universe now, the soul demons were already waiting for him, their eyes fixed on him. But did Bufang look like a coward? He knew there were tigers in the mountains, but he still went there. With a knife in his hand, a wok on his head, and a stove under his feet, he would surely turn the primitive universe upside down. Chapter 1789. Bufang said he was going to the primitive universe. However, he did not go there directly. Instead, he stayed in Cooking God Little Restaurant for a few days to make preparations. After all, the primitive universe was at war with the soul demon universe, and it was extremely dangerous. If he really wanted to go over and have some fun, he really had to prepare a foolproof plan. After all, in the eyes of the soul demons, he had long been regarded as a thorn in their side, and they would not feel comfortable unless they killed him. Bufang knew very well that he did not get the title of the soul demon's nemesis for nothing. From the soul god to the little soul demons, no one would let him go easily if they had the chance. Therefore, Bufang needed to be prepared in advance. Of course, he continued to enjoy a few days of leisure. He cooked a few dishes and made a few glasses of wine. Although the chaos pot was ineffective against perfected great soul overlords, it could still pose a little threat to ordinary Duke-level experts. So, Bufang spent a few days making a few chaos pots. Lord Go and Hades' era left. They returned to the chaotic universe. Bufang had mastered the law of space, so it was easy for him to send them away. As for Little Hu, he did not want to leave. After all, he would not have anything to eat if he left Bufang. So, Little Hu clung to Bufang's thigh. No matter how hard Lord Go and Hades' era tried to persuade him, they could not do anything. In the end, they could only let Little Hu stay by Bufang's side. It seemed that he planned to go to the primitive universe with Bufang. In the past few days, there had been a lot of customers in the restaurant, so Bufang was quite busy. However, he enjoyed being busy. Wasn't this the life he yearned for? He wanted to open a small restaurant where the customers paid for their meals, and he was responsible for cooking and basking in the sun. However, the leisurely days would eventually come to an end. Bufang did not delay for too long. He had to go to the primitive universe, and he felt that he might get answers to many things there. In Master Chef Restaurant, Bufang picked Xiao Xiaolong from the apprentices and asked him to continue his business. Marquis Langu was in charge of cooking dark cuisine. Xiao Bai followed Bufang. With Little Hu and Xiao Bai on his shoulders, Bufang strode out of Void City. He left quietly, just as he came quietly. Not many people knew that he had left. With his hands clasped behind his back, Bufang led Xiao Bai, Little Hu, and Xiaopi out of District A. He did not teleport away. Instead, he strolled through one city district after another. Leisurely, he went through several districts once. District A, District B, District C, and so on. Bufang even went to District D, which had left the deepest impression on him. The people left in District D were all exiles from the outside. Some of them had just been exiled, while others had been floating in District D for tens of thousands of years. At last, Bufang stepped out of the gate of District D and walked along the narrow bridge over the River of Curses, just as he did when he first stepped into Void City. He looked over his shoulder at the huge city that towered into the clouds behind him. This city which drifted in the starry sky, surrounded by the power of curses. It had left him with a unique experience. With his cultivation base as a saint of the Great Path, Bufong could walk freely in the void. He could even travel across the starry sky. The bottom of the broken void city was covered by a white-boned ship. Bufong looked at it with a deep look in his eyes. Behind him, Xiao Bai's purple eyes flashed. On Xiao Bai's head were Little Hu and Xiaopi. They were facing Void City, the cursed city that drifted in the starry sky. Then, the corner of Bufong's mouth twitched slightly. He took a deep breath. "It's time to go." Buzz, his spirit sea stirred. In an instant, the whole universe seemed to be stirred up by thousands of blasts. Bufong's aura became unstable. Specks of white light emerged in front of him. Bufong comprehended the 5 supreme laws of the universe, and he was very familiar with the law of space. The Temple of Heaven God Space had always existed in the chaos space. Bufong had found many ancient books in it. In fact, Bufong had even wondered if Heaven God Space had returned. He just did not know. After all, the existence of the Temple of Heaven God meant the return of Heaven God. However, the Lord Go said that Heaven God Space had not returned, so Bufong did not take it seriously. White specks of light appeared one after another. They were the light provided by the system. With Bufong's current strength, he had analyzed their mysteries. They were not the law of space. Bufong did not know what kind of power they were. From the books in the Temple of Heaven God Space, Bufong learned the way to go to the primitive universe. Heaven God Space was a man who drifted around the world and went to all kinds of places. Perhaps this was a common failing of every heaven god. However, Bufong, who had comprehended the law of space, did not have this feeling. He preferred to stay in a little shop, cook, and play with Shrimpy. The light was assembled. An array was spinning in midair. Hutu, Duchess Nightmare, and the other experts had already gone to the primitive universe. They had their own means to go there. However, Bufong had one as well. The array rumbled. A beam of white light rose into the sky and rushed into the starry sky. Huge ripples spread out in all directions. Bufong, Xiao Bai, and the others disappeared in an instant. In Void City, in front of the huge queen's palace, the little girl was sitting leisurely in a chair, holding a spicy strip in one hand. She was eating the spicy strip happily. When she saw the energy ripples, she exhaled with a spicy strip in her mouth. She hoped that Bufong could stop Soul God from gathering more fleshly bodies. If all the fleshly bodies were gathered, it would be a disaster for heaven and earth. All the universes would face true destruction. It did not feel good to teleport. However, Bufong's fleshly body was so strong that even the void might not be able to tear him apart. Therefore, the uncomfortable feeling was like a mosquito bite to him. He did not mind it at all. Needless to say, Little Hu and Xiaopi were fine. Xiaopi's iron skin was fine as well. There was a flash of light. The white light quietly faded away. Bufong's figure emerged in an instant. He was holding an oyster pancake in his hand, which still emitted a strong aroma. There are not so many taboos in the primitive universe. Food was very popular here. The ancients said that food was the most important thing for the people. This saying was also applicable in the primitive universe. After all, there were more humans in the primordial world. Bufong stuffed the oyster pancake into his mouth before he leisurely observed his surroundings. There was nothing special about the primordial universe. Perhaps the energy floating in the air was weaker than that in Void City and the chaos space, but it was not much weaker. As soon as Bufong entered the untainted universe, his brows furrowed involuntarily. He looked up at the sky. It was as if a majestic will had enveloped the entire universe. This feeling was very obvious. Bufong was also somewhat enlightened. Huda once said that there were actually existences at the level of Soul God in the primordial world. However, due to the restrictions, he was unable to use it. Bufong might have understood a little. In the depths of Bufong was an extremely desolate area. On the vast continent below, there was nothing but rubble. Jagged rocks grew ferociously, forming hills without vegetation. It was a desolate place. The primordial universe was extremely vast, and Bu Fong was in the primitive universe, the center of it. His divine sense spread out in his spirit sea. In a flash, it spread out at a speed of 10,000 miles per second. Vaguely, Bu Fong sensed a powerful fluctuation. Go in that direction. Bu Fong thought for a moment and said. Then, he floated into the air. Whitey lifted its fan-like palm and rubbed its round head before following after them. Bu Fong flew at a very fast speed. Soon, he had crossed 10,000 miles. Along the way, Bu Fong saw the strangeness of the primitive universe. All kinds of powerful creatures roamed in it. For example, a huge demon ape roared at the sun and the moon. Its aura was extremely fearsome, and it was actually at the level of a half-step saint. There were also wind wolves that were as swift as the wind, galloping in the wilderness. These savage beasts fought and hunted each other. Their goal was to survive, eat each other, and obtain the essence of the Great Path in each other. The primitive universe's will of the Great Path was very terrifying. Even Bu Fong did not dare to touch it. This kind of will of the Great Path was the most terrifying one Bu Fong had ever seen. In fact, at Bu Fong's level, he was basically not afraid of the Great Path. However, in the primitive universe, he was a little frightened when facing the Great Path. This kind of Great Path was not the kind of will of the Great Path of the Great Worlds and Small Worlds. That kind of will was too weak, and Bu Fong could destroy it at will. The primitive universe was vast and boundless. It stretched into the void, and there was no end to it. Since the Great Path could cover such a world, it was naturally extraordinary. The huge demon ape and the wind wolf were fighting. After the battle broke out, the sky fell and the earth cracked. Rubble flew everywhere, causing the ground to crack. Bu Fong hovered in the sky, watching the battle below. Soon, the battle was over. The wind wolf defeated the demon ape, which dragged its crippled body and quickly fled. The wind wolf had not yet felt the joy of victory. He was slapped to death by Whitey, who had descended from the sky. After a long time, the divine fire burned fiercely. The roasted red wolf meat was dripping with oil. Bu Fong led Xiao Bai, Xiao Opi, and Lil Hu all the way. He was not in a hurry, enjoying the local customs of the primitive universe. Occasionally, when he was tired or hungry, he would kill a ferocious beast and cook it on the spot. Frying, stir-frying, steaming, roasting, and stir-frying. Bu Fong could use every cooking method with ease. Little Hu's eyes narrowed into arcs as he ate. Sure enough, following Bu Fong, one would have meat to eat. This is the truth. Bu Fong also saw humans in the primitive universe. However, they were all mortals. There might be cultivators among them, but they were not very strong. In Bu Fong's eyes, they were all mortals. The mortals built cities and recuperated. Naturally, cooking skills were indispensable in the cities. He even disguised himself as a mortal, went to the city, and wandered around for a while. He wanted to taste the simple delicacies of the primitive universe. However, these delicacies could only be said to be ordinary. They did not surprise Bu Fong, so he did not stay for too long. After all, Bu Fong knew why he came here. He left the cities and headed toward the center of the primitive universe. More and more mortal kingdoms and city-states appeared. The cultivators were also getting stronger and stronger. Rumble. Finally, on this day, Bu Fong sensed the terrifying aura of a battle. A battle of this level belonged to a saint of the Great Path. The power of sin spread, coupled with the impact of the magic power of a saint of the Great Path. Bu Fong sensed it from a distance. It was a battle between a soul demon and a saint of the Great Path of the primitive universe. With a thought in his mind, Bu Fong flew away with Xiao Bai and the others. Judging from the aura he sensed, the saint of the Great Path of the primitive universe did not seem to be in a good condition. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.